On that warm and sunny morning, the girl was in a great mood. Birds were chirping among the leaves, glistening in the sun, and the other maids were celebrating finally finishing the laundry, complaining about their stiff backs. Another one bragged that she had gained some muscle in the past few days, saying their work was more tiring than blacksmithing. Afterwards, feeling exhausted, they decided to take a short break, because if they went back right away, they would just be swamped with new chores again. Just then, they noticed Princess Grace walking by, the princess everyone in the empire considered as beautiful as a fairy. The girls thought the king must be very happy to have such a daughter, as she could wear whatever she pleased. But Sienna didn't find Grace pretty. She noticed that the size of Grace's dress was clearly wrong, as if it were several sizes too large. The girl explained that it was like dressing a piglet and suspected she must be in great pain wearing that corset. It looked as if someone had forcibly tied the princess up with steel cables, and she still had to walk around and smile. The maids were surprised she could see so much detail, but she didn't admit that just a few months ago, she herself had been a princess. When she was born, her mother was the queen, her father was the king, and she was the little princess, Sienna Assalant von Salite. Like any other princess, she thought her life was a fortunate one, but her mother passed away when she was only 10 years old. Her father decided to remarry to strengthen the kingdom, and Sienna, missing her mother terribly, felt incredibly lonely. Her stepmother announced that, in the name of the former queen, she would do her best to raise the girl into a proper princess. During Sienna's education, she was severely bullied. Her stepmother thought she was far too stupid for her age. The queen then announced that from now on, for every mistake the princess made, she would be punished with a whipping. Sienna tried her best, but because of the corset and the overly heavy dress, she couldn't properly curtsy to greet her stepmother. She felt like she was about to die, but she didn't give up. Yet she messed up the curtsy again, and the queen saw it as disobedience. The queen said the princess was a burden and declared she was not qualified to call herself a princess, nor could the king take her to banquets. She also explained that this was all for the good of the kingdom, so the little girl shouldn't hold any resentment or anger towards her. She raised the whip to strike the girl, but froze when the king walked in. The princess silently pleaded with him for help, but he just said that there was nothing wrong with the queen disciplining a lazy child. In that moment, Sienna felt lost and betrayed. She couldn't believe this was all her fault. All she wanted was to be happy, but she no longer wanted to be a princess and just wanted to escape. She dreamed of running away, missing her mother, but she knew she had to endure it all until she was 18. By then, their castle had fallen into the hands of another kingdom, the conqueror of the entire continent. Soon, the notorious Bloody Prince, Rashid Labazuin, appeared. He was the first prince of the Labazuin Empire. He announced that they had not responded to his letter demanding their surrender, so he had come in person. Then he asked if they were willing to surrender to him. Sienna felt this was her chance. If they surrendered, they wouldn't die. But the king declared he would not serve some lowly invader and demanded they kill him now. In that instant, Prince Rashid cleanly cut off his head and declared that they were the first to refuse to yield. Moreover, he had intended to spare them without killing a single person, but the whole thing was so boring he didn't even feel anything. Then the princess saw him walking towards her, but she didn't want to die. She was still just a child. She couldn't believe it was all over, and she fell to her knees at his feet, begging for help, saying she would do anything. Rashid thought she was offering herself as his wife, but Sienna insisted she was far from ready and not at all feminine. She even said she couldn't compare to the kingdom's greatest beauties. Although she appeared fearless, she really just wanted to live. Then, the girl explained that she was in excellent health, could do embroidery, and could brew fragrant and delicious tea. After saying all this, the princess declared she could become the prince's most perfect maid. Afterwards, even she couldn't believe she had spouted such absurd nonsense. And then she looked at the prince and noticed how handsome he was. Everyone said he was the greatest warrior on the continent, but Sienna decided he was just using his charm. Rashid then noticed that her face was round and soft, like bread made from the purest wheat flour. Then he finally agreed to let the princess be a servant in the imperial palace and ordered her to be untied. The girl was ecstatic to have survived in this hellish place. She then thanked the prince and told him her name. She also assured him she would never forget his kindness, while he thought to himself that he had picked a cute one. And so, Sienna became a servant in the imperial palace. Although she sometimes felt depressed about why she was so unlucky. Now, thanks to her, fresh bread was baked, clothes were washed clean, and the garden became more beautiful. Before, she had to wear a body-crushing corset all day and smile like a doll. Now her life was completely different, and Sienna even found being a servant more interesting and comfortable, which she thought was great. Now, the girl wanted to be a maid for the rest of her life. To keep things tidy, she often did things proactively without being asked. The other maids thought she was trying to suck up to the senior maids and explained that she should ask what to do first. It was mainly a maid named Jean who was angry. She told Sienna that she was nothing more than a slave from a conquered nation. She also made it clear that the girl would never make it into the main maid staff and always treated her like trash. Just then, another person, Choo-Choo, came in and yelled at Jean, saying that instead of helping, she was bullying someone who was slow. She also threatened the shouting girl that if she kept it up, she would report her to the head maid. Jean backed down then, but she told Choo-Choo she could go on playing with these little brats who knew nothing. Then she poured out a bucket of water and told Sienna she could continue doing her favorite thing, cleaning. After that, everyone dispersed. Jean, who remained, advised the newcomer to fight back. She explained that they only picked on her because she endured it silently. But Sienna had no idea people were bothering her. You see, for the former princess who had been bullied by the new queen her whole life, such complaints even sounded a little sweet. Now the girl understood they were being disrespectful to her, and Choo-Choo said that considering her family, it wasn't easy to fight back. She knew that girl came from a respected family within the kingdom, so no matter what she did, she was basically guaranteed to become a maid. The other two apprentice maids also wanted to get some benefits from Jean, so they always followed her around. So she just hung around leisurely, hoping they would choose her because of her family background. But Choo-Choo, like Sienna, was also just an apprentice maid. She had a strong and sturdy build, which made her one of the more promising apprentices. And she had no family connections to rely on, so there was no guarantee she could officially become a maid. Jean understood that Sienna also had nowhere to go, but somehow she had become an apprentice maid. This meant someone had helped her, and the princess guessed it was the emperor of this country. Or perhaps it was because the girl had abandoned her princess's dignity and knelt on the ground to beg for mercy. Sienna thought that in that moment, she must have seemed pathetic or ridiculous to Rashid, that he hadn't pitied her at all, and it was just a whim. But she couldn't admit all this to Jean, so she just claimed that no one had helped her. Just then, the emperor's personal guard, Sul, walked in and saw him playing with his little animals. The emperor himself was stunningly beautiful, with an angelic face that captivated all who saw him. He could even mesmerize his enemies on the battlefield, and Sul, who had grown up with him, knew this better than anyone. He asked the guard how that girl was doing, and Sul reported that she was doing well. He added that Sienna wasn't used to physical labor and was a bit lost, but she was smart and a fast learner. However, it would still take time for her to become an official maid. Sul wondered why Rashid was so worried about her. He didn't know himself. He thought he just felt sorry for her because he had destroyed her country and killed her family. The guard was surprised, asking why he was still thinking about it now when he had destroyed so many lives. Then Sul asked the emperor to just confess that he had always had a thing for girls like that, small, with big eyes, and looking harmless. And it was true. Rashid, the so-called bloody emperor, this cruel and handsome man, just loved animals. Sul was still shocked every time he saw it, and the emperor admitted that Sienna did bear a resemblance to them. He even said that he hoped she would become an official maid, and that they would find a good position for her. But Sul argued that they couldn't just promote an apprentice, maid whose skills hadn't been proven, to an official one. Rashid agreed and decided they should test her abilities themselves to see if she had potential. The maids went to lunch, and there was no meat again. But Sienna said they shouldn't focus on proper dining etiquette, claiming they could now eat as much as they wanted. But the others thought she felt that way because she was from another country. Sienna also thought there was no need to maintain a conversation, so this place and position were like heaven to her. Jean even joked, asking how she could eat this garbage, and the girl realized she was being made fun of again. Sienna thought she should be crying after hearing something like that, but she just had a blank expression. Jean didn't understand what was wrong with the girl, why she found everything normal, saying it didn't make her look cool. Choo-Choo thought the girl from a foreign land should be more worried, then yelled at the complainer, saying she was always bullying quiet people. But Jean pointed out she had defended her before, then reminded her that she was in charge now and to read the room. Then they started a back-and-forth argument, which reminded Sienna of a grizzly bear and a hyena fighting. Just then, the etiquette instructor, Miss Lip walked in, saw two of her students arguing, and immediately asked what was going on. They both shut up at once, and Lip ordered them not to cause trouble in front of her, no matter how much they wanted to fight. Then she announced that an official document had come down from above and that a tea party would be held in a few days. All the students would serve the guests with Lip, and it was very important to follow strict etiquette and make no mistakes. An official maid would also be working with them, but the girls started wondering who would be at the tea party. They guessed it would be the wife of some great noble or a beautiful princess from a neighboring country. But Lip explained that the guests were the fruit farmer ladies who supplied the imperial palace. The quality of the fruit they had grown for the palace for many years was excellent, and this tea party was to show our gratitude. In addition, there would be training on the morning before the tea party. So everyone was to gather in the garden immediately after waking up, and Sienna was happy she was chosen for the job. Jean, however, was angry that she had to serve some old hags and thought the job was perfect for a newcomer. Then she sneered that Sienna wouldn't have been at the reception if it weren't to serve those ladies. The former princess understood that the ladies were just from the working class, which was why they felt safe letting apprentice maids serve. It didn't require special care, or else they would have sent official maids to the reception. But it still seemed strange. The next morning, Lip began teaching the apprentices tea ceremony etiquette, and first, they must not forget they were in the imperial palace. The girls had to learn this well, so as not to bring shame to the imperial family. Choo-Choo was happy that she was being allowed to try being a maid, even though the official work hadn't started yet. She said she would give it her all, but was worried her motivation and skill level might not match. Then she started pouring tea, and Lip corrected her, reminding her not to splash it everywhere. The other apprentices made fun of her, calling her a muscle-bound idiot, and saying tea wasn't the beer her minor dad drank. Choo-Choo was angry that the other apprentices said that, and she was also frustrated at being scolded by the teacher. Next, it was Jean's turn to pour the tea, and she did it perfectly and neatly, earning praise from the teacher. The girl was thrilled about this because she had been taught by a famous etiquette instructor in the capital. Lip thought that Jean shouldn't be at the level of an apprentice maid at all. Besides, there were rumors that she would become the head maid and serve Her Majesty the Empress. Sienna herself saw that she did a good job, but thought it was only at a beginner's level, still just the level of an apprentice maid. Before, the queen would immediately punish the carefully selected maids for even the slightest mistake. To soothe the queen's bad mood, these maids' skills in pouring and serving tea were more elegant than any noble ladies. Compared to what Sienna had seen before, everyone here seemed clumsy. Now, it was her turn to practice pouring tea, and for now, this was enough. She was no longer a princess and didn't want to draw attention to herself because of her past. She poured the tea slowly and deliberately, but with a hint of clumsiness. Sienna really wanted to stay in the imperial palace, and she knew she had to keep a low profile to do so. After the afternoon training, the apprentice maids had to go to their designated places to finish the work they couldn't do in the morning. This meant cleaning the palace, starting fires, and washing dishes, but everyone managed. Then they brought out snacks made from leftover bread, which was a treat for the hungry apprentice maids. Sienna was grateful, thinking it was worth working in the kitchen for this, and was glad they were assigned here. Suddenly, she noticed Choo-Choo was acting strange today, barely talking, so she offered her some food. So she asked the former princess if it was hard learning from the maids. Sienna said they weren't actually that strict and admitted she was even a little jealous. The princess remembered that Choo-Choo had been criticized the most during the tea ceremony lesson today, which was probably why she was so down. Before this, the student had always been praised, but this was the first time this had happened, and she was taking it too hard. It turned out this was Choo-Choo's first real test too, and she admitted that Jean was right, that she had never really drunk tea before. And she didn't have any experience to help her, and everyone noticed she was the worst at it. Now Choo-Choo was afraid the guests would be angry with her, and Sienna decided she had to help the girl. So she offered to practice together every day during their break, just the two of them. Choo-Choo was thrilled, hoping she would teach her everything, and thinking she was very kind. After that, they started practicing every night, with Sienna explaining that first, you have to boil the right amount of water, okay? Next, you put a spoonful of tea leaves into a warm teapot and immediately brew it with boiling water. After that, strain it with a tea strainer. I should mention, to become an expert at this, you need a lot of practice. Over time, Choo-Choo's skills got better and better, and although it wasn't perfect, she no longer mixed up the order or spilled the tea. Sienna was relieved now. Choo-Choo definitely wouldn't be accused of mistreating the guests, and not a single drop of water would be wasted. Choo-Choo thanked her friend for her teaching, thinking Sienna taught better than any of the other maids. But the former princess humbly explained that it was Choo-Choo who worked hard, so she was improving because she was also a diligent student. During their training, they became quite close, and Choo-Choo told her partner a lot about herself. She confessed that she came from a small mining town in the east, and her father was a miner who worked every day. He had to feed 13 children, which surprised Sienna. Choo-Choo added that they were a very close family, but they had a hard time making ends meet, which was why she applied for a maid's job to help her father. She admitted that the salary for an official maid was much higher, and she hoped her little brothers and sisters could eat meat every day. Then Choo-Choo started asking Sienna how she got here, guessing her story might be complicated since she was from overseas. Just then, the girl confessed that she was once the princess of a small kingdom, and that the crown prince had assigned her here. He explained that he felt sorry for her because she had lost her country and her parents. Choo-Choo couldn't believe Sienna was talking about the bloodthirsty Prince Rashid, who had never lost a battle. It was even more unbelievable that a former princess had met him. Sienna suddenly remembered the stories from a maid she had overheard while walking by and realized what a big deal he was. The girls whispered that His Highness the Crown Prince was more handsome than a statue. They gushed about how his silver hair shone in the sun, and how his violet eyes were as bright as the Milky Way. Then Choo-Choo confessed to the princess that she only dreamed of meeting the prince, and Sienna confirmed that he was indeed very handsome. Then she wondered if he was really a cold-hearted bastard despite being so good-looking. Sienna confirmed this too, saying he had wiped out her entire family. Just then, Choo-Choo apologized for blurting that out without thinking. The princess still couldn't say how she really felt, insisting she was fine because those people had made her life a living hell. But Choo-Choo said, no, that's just outrageous. She couldn't believe she could accept all this, considering the prince had murdered her entire family. But Sienna just repeated herself, explaining that it had been a long time and there was no reason to make a fuss about it. Choo-Choo still knew she was only saying that so she wouldn't feel guilty. She also pointed out that the former princess was very kind. Then she hugged her and repeated it several times. From that day on, Sienna's attitude towards her friend completely changed, and Choo-Choo began to treat her differently too. One evening, while cleaning, Jean snuck up on the princess to scare her, but Choo-Choo stood in front of her like a mother bear, warning her not to even think about saying anything out of line to Sienna. If Jean didn't listen, the protector threatened to stretch her face as long as cheese and wrap it around a pole. She was terrified, but immediately started making excuses, saying she just wanted to know what time it was, and then left. In addition, Choo-Choo always brought Sienna food for no reason and urged her to eat, saying she still needed to grow. She mainly brought the princess sweets, explaining that they were much sweeter and tastier than hard bread. Meanwhile, Choo-Choo hated the prince for making this little girl lose her family, thinking he was a total scumbag. The maid wished all sorts of bad things would happen to him, and while they mostly sounded childish, she said them with all her heart. Sienna even felt a little sorry for the crown prince she hated, but it was nice to have someone on her side. Anyway, he was in a high position and probably heard many people speak ill of him every day. Just then, Rashid received a letter from Baroness Appleton, and Sol, noticing the prince scratching, asked him what was wrong. But he just explained that his ear was itchy and even recalled the superstition that someone was bad-mouthing him. At that moment, Sol refuted this, saying that if that were true, the prince should have been rolling on the ground for years, scratching his ears raw. Then he noticed a chipmunk nibbling on an apple and commented that it must be delicious. Rashid agreed that the Appleton family's apples were the best, and the guard pointed out that those fruit farmers had never been invited to the imperial palace to be thanked. Then he suggested the emperor host a reception, and that he could use it as an excuse to go see Sienna. The prince liked the idea and decided to reward the guard by letting him play with his cute pets for half a day. Sol still refused, and Rashid declared that he just didn't understand how adorable his little darlings were. Then he read a letter and told his guard that the baroness would also be happy to attend the tea party. The maids received all sorts of training because the imperial family status could not be diminished by a servant's mistake. Meanwhile, they had to clear the uneven lawn and set up tables according to the number of guests. To top it off, Sienna added the hydrangeas she had cut in the morning so it wouldn't look too plain. Afterwards, she decided to enjoy the view, while Choo-Choo told her some gossip. She confessed that not only the fruit farmers were coming to the tea party, but also the owner of the orchard, Baroness Appleton. Now Sienna understood why everyone was so excited. Besides the guests, they also wanted to make a good impression on the Baroness. The girls also noticed that Jean looked especially pretty today, even changing her jewelry and makeup. Choo-Choo thought it looked a bit tacky, and Sienna doubted it would make a good impression on the Baroness. Her friend guessed it was because this was Jean's first time serving guests, and then admitted she had dressed up a little herself. She was also worried if things would go smoothly, but Sienna told her not to be nervous, as she hadn't taught her to be a maid for nothing. There wasn't much time left before the gates opened and the guests arrived, so the maids braced themselves to welcome them. The guests were surprised that this was the imperial palace, and one of them had even worn her best dress. After the greetings, the apprentice maids guided the guests to the dining tables, but Jean stood motionless. The other girls couldn't understand why she was being so pretentious, but they guessed she was trying to find a way to please the Baroness. Even during the service, the place was filled with a high society atmosphere, and the guests were already gossiping about the maids. However, the banquet couldn't begin until everyone had arrived, and the Baroness herself was the last to show up. The apprentice maids were thrilled to see her, especially Jean, because the Baroness was stunningly beautiful. A maid immediately rushed forward, giving her VIP treatment and thanking her for coming. Jean's face became extremely contorted for a moment due to nervousness, and she knew anyone who saw it would run for the hills. However, she managed to remain calm, asked the lady to follow her, and then led her to the reserved seat. Sienna caught a sweet and expensive scent of roses from Appleton, even though she had thought they were just some country nobles. The former princess also noticed that the woman was breathtakingly beautiful. She had always been curious about what the Baroness looked like, and now she was even a little jealous of Jean. The other guests noticed someone else had arrived, but Sienna couldn't see who it was clearly. But she soon saw a hunched-over old woman approaching, who was so unsightly that no one wanted to serve her. The banquet was still waiting for the last guest, so it hadn't started yet. So Sienna went over and greeted the old woman. The girl understood that no guest should be ignored and then offered to escort her to a table. Each table seated 3 to 4 guests and was served by one maid. After all the guests were seated, it was announced that the royal banquet would now begin. The guests chatted about what it was like to be in the imperial palace, even though it seemed like an ordinary tea party. They even admitted they thought they would be picking apples their whole lives and never experience such luxury. Sienna overheard their conversation and realized they were just chatting about daily trifles, not matters of state, which made the atmosphere quite relaxed. But the former princess devoted herself to service and soon presented the guests with the day's dessert. She lifted the lid, explaining that it was chocolate made from Kona cocoa, and suggested they taste it directly to savor its flavor. The ladies were surprised that they were able to eat chocolate, which was usually reserved for the royal family. It was said to be so sweet that even the prince himself would stop complaining after tasting it. Then, the ladies began to talk about the dessert, and each put a piece in her mouth. Instantly, a pleasant sweetness washed over them, and they realized the stuff was incredibly delicious. The chocolate melted in their mouths, and they began to worry that the sweetness was disappearing too quickly. Sienna knew that this reaction was completely normal for someone trying chocolate for the first time. The former princess also noticed that the old woman had quickly finished her dessert and was wiping the crumbs from her mouth. Then, a maid approached her and offered a napkin, as she understood the old woman was uncomfortable with chocolate all over her hands. The girl offered to get her something else, but she just turned away and refused. At this, the other guests remembered they had handkerchiefs and offered them to her. They also felt that these maids, who were used to serving noble ladies, must feel awkward serving people like them. But Sienna explained that everything was fine, that they were all her honored guests, and then asked them to continue enjoying the tea party. The girl offered to pour the ladies some Ingrid Earl Grey tea, hoping they would like it, but she also added that they could let her know anytime if they wanted something else. The guests agreed and soon tasted the delicious tea, realizing it was the kind the royal family drank. Then, one lady said she couldn't quite tell the difference between this tea and the one she drank at home. And the old woman explained that to truly taste the flavor of food or drink, one must take small sips. The ladies understood that only the baroness would know such a thing, but they also knew that she was the guest of honor today. So Sienna guessed that not everyone knew the baroness and decided to ask. They explained that Appleton Namjic had recently married, and one lady added that she must not have been on the farm before, as she had never seen her. But she had heard that the Baron fell in love with her at first sight because she was indeed stunningly beautiful. Now Sienna understood that Jean had to listen carefully to this guest, and she couldn't mess up because if she annoyed her, the whole party would be ruined. And that cranky girl was thrilled to finally be able to serve the most important guest. Jean was a merchant's daughter, and she believed it was her duty to serve someone like the Baroness. She presented the palace's chocolate to Appleton, explaining that it was top grade and worth a try. But the Baroness just sat there, staring at the dessert, and then asked how long this maid intended to ignore her. Appleton also said that Jean's arrogant greeting and the way she looked at her made her feel as if she were covered in mud. She had even been enduring the sight of that dessert, and then she declared that the tea the maid had poured for her was terrible. After that, the Baroness wondered how much longer she had to endure this disrespect, while Jean simply offered to pour her another cup of tea. The maid was certain she hadn't messed anything up. She had trained in a noble household, and the other maids always praised her. The Baroness also pointed out that the maids in the imperial palace were usually top-notch, but something fell off. Then she remembered that maids who messed up were severely punished. Appleton added that they would be locked in a cage or whipped, and if they messed up again, they would lose an arm or a leg. Then she asked Jean what kind of punishment she thought she deserved, and the poor girl just trembled in fear. Sienna stepped in, explaining that their skills were still basic and that Jean wasn't ready to serve a guest of such high status. Then, the former princess began to plead with the Baroness to forgive the maid's mistake. But the Baroness retorted sharply that if bowing and apologizing could solve problems, their world would be ridiculously simple. Appleton didn't understand why she should give this maid a second chance, especially when the banquet was hosted by the royal family. Sienna explained that the king would be very angry if the party was ruined because of a mere maid. She hoped the Baroness wouldn't want to see that happen either, but for some reason, the Baroness took her words as a threat. The former princess swore she wouldn't do that and explained that those were just requests to make the guest feel comfortable. After considering, the Baroness agreed to be served by Sienna, but declared that if she was not satisfied, all her anger would be directed at her. The maid agreed, but then she saw her stepmother's face again, the face that had once genuinely praised her tea. It was a situation that allowed no mistakes, one that had stolen a part of her life, and she could never forget that time. Now, she poured tea for the Baroness, explaining its origin again, hoping she wouldn't mind trying this special blend. The Baroness watched the maid's every move, noticing her etiquette was impeccable. Sienna knew the most important things in brewing tea were the tea leaves and the ratio of boiling water to leaves. The previous mistake was in the way the tea was brewed and served, which resulted in a bitter taste and a weak aroma. This couldn't be messed up. The amount of hot water couldn't be much more than the tea leaves, or the taste would be wrong. Moreover, to pour tea well, you have to hold the pot high, allowing the stream to touch the air so the aroma can be released more quickly. You also have to be careful not to splash the tea outside the cup, and then slowly hand the cup to your guest. Sienna was very sure she had perfected the tea-to-water ratio and told the Baroness to speak up if anything was amiss. She knew she had brewed the tea perfectly with the best leaves, but if the guest didn't like it, she was done for. Sienna froze, waiting for a reaction, even holding her breath, but then Appleton announced that the tea was delicious. The former princess celebrated silently in her heart, thankful that she had succeeded, and then decided to take her leave. She simply asked her guest to call her if she needed anything. Soon, the tea party and its relaxed atmosphere came to an end, after which the guests began to leave one by one. Sienna went to the lady she had been serving before and apologized for having to leave her. But she assured her it was fine, because if the Baroness had gotten angry, things would have been much worse, and she admitted she had been terrified too. The lady also said that thanks to Sienna's efforts, they were able to fully enjoy the banquet. Then she thanked her. The girl was happy that the guest understood their situation and told her to be careful before she left. Then the old woman walked up to Sienna, and the maid guessed she wanted to say something to her. She began hesitantly, saying she had thought a lot and admitted she had expected to be treated poorly in the imperial palace. She also said she was scared at first, but swore that meeting Sienna was her good fortune, and it was then that she found her courage again. The girl became happy again and repeated repeated that the amount of boiling water shouldn't exceed the tea leaves or the taste would change. Then the old woman admitted she had the best chocolate tea and had a wonderful time chatting. Sienna remembered that since ancient times, Maid were not supposed to show much emotion and just had to be polite to everyone. Although she was very happy that everything was resolved smoothly, she didn't know what to do next. However, she still smiled and thanked the old woman for letting her meet such a good person. From a distance, the baroness watched Sienna say goodbye to the old woman. After the banquet, the maids began to clean up. They had basically dedicated their entire day to serving the guests. This was supposed to be the life of a maid, but it was actually more like maid training. Their work finished late, and by the end of the day, Lip knew she was exhausted and needed to sleep immediately. But it wasn't all bad, because they could enjoy the leftover food from the banquet. Sienna was eating bitter cocoa with high-grade butter, but Choo-Choo refused, saying she would lose muscle. The princess even felt sorry for her, thinking she must have it tough, but the maid didn't know why. She kept staring at Choo-Choo. Choo-Choo admitted that when she started working, she never thought things would turn out this way, and she remembered a lady who had offered to take her in. The guest, after seeing her huge triceps, thought she would be very useful on a farm. Sienna still didn't understand why she refused to work on a farm, and another girl explained that was exactly where the other maids wanted her to go. Just then, the other maids came over, all praising the princess for handling the baroness so well. Then they started begging the girl to teach them how to brew tea perfectly, even bickering over who would learn first. But then Jean shouted, "Are you all crazy?" reminding them that Serenia was the one who made the best tea. The red-haired maid couldn't believe the others were now ignoring her, concluding they had no self-respect. The girls were surprised, thinking she should be ashamed by now, which was probably why she had been so quiet. They also started scolding her, saying the banquet was almost ruined because of her, and thanked Sienna for saving everything. They also explained that otherwise, all of them could have been punished, and Jean herself might have been fired. Now they were blasting her, saying that not only did she not apologize, but she said something like that and told her to get a grip. Jean immediately exploded, declaring she didn't understand how anyone could talk to people like them. Meanwhile, Sienna remembered that the baroness was a cut above the other guests, and even her posture exuded elegance. It wasn't just her posture that the girl noticed. Even the gesture of her hand as she drank tea indicated she was from a noble family. Sienna also liked this lady, but not because she was a baroness. The girls sensed something special about her. Late that night, Saul, the guard at the emperor's bedroom door, noticed someone approaching. He recognized the baroness, but explained that it would cause trouble if she entered the room in those clothes. But Appleton, who strictly followed etiquette, admitted that she still couldn't forget that maid. The guard just asked her to forget about it, assuring her that no one meant any harm. Then, noticing her expression, Saul began to apologize, clarifying that he didn't mean it that way at all. But she just smiled, finding him amusing, and explained that it wasn't funny at all. The baroness also didn't understand what kind of soldiers they were becoming, and wished she could see him beg for forgiveness. Then, walking into the emperor's room, Appleton saw all sorts of small animals and birds waiting there to greet her. The baroness didn't care how it looked. She just loved them. Then a small bird flew over and landed on her hand. Just then, Saul addressed her as Your Majesty and explained that he had prepared her bath. Rashid had decided to use a priceless magic stone to change his appearance for half a day. After the emperor settled into the bath, the guard asked how the meeting went and if the maids did their job. He admitted it went quite well and that the one who had recently become a princess managed to learn all the etiquette. However, Rashid was bothered by the way she held the teapot and how she didn't look him in the eye. Even so, he thought it was great and everything was done exactly as written in the maid etiquette manual. The emperor found the girl interesting, and the guard didn't understand why he would think so. Saul knew he usually hated these kinds of things, and now he didn't understand what had gotten into his majesty. Many had noticed the emperor was starting to become kinder and more approachable, and the girls even had the nerve to ask what his ideal type was. Rashid didn't answer directly, just vaguely saying he liked cute girls who win you over with a smile. His majesty had changed so much that the way he looked at his people now was almost strange. The guard also felt that the princess had settled in, and maybe being a maid was her calling. Saul also noticed that the emperor only talked about her and never about getting married and having an heir. The guard began to suspect his majesty intended for the girl to be more than just his personal servant. He then reminded Rashid that Sienna was from a country he had conquered, and if he had any untoward plans, it would end in disaster. He explained that he was just testing her abilities and then admitted he found her extremely beautiful. Meanwhile, the princess found a hole in her apron and decided to mend it quickly, as she had been doing embroidery since she was 5. As the maids marveled at her speed, Lip came in and announced that Sienna had a visitor. The instructor said that Baroness Appleton wanted to explain something to her, which was why she was here. The girl was confused. The tea party had gone well, and she thought she must have messed up at some point. She went through a million possibilities in her head, but couldn't figure out what she had done wrong. Then she entered the hall, and the Baroness immediately apologized for coming unannounced. But then she stood up, and Sienna was shocked to see it wasn't the Baroness, but the old woman. She then apologized to the maid and decided to introduce herself, explaining that she was Magdalena Appleton. The old woman also said that Sienna had left a very good impression on her at the tea party and then greeted her again. This all caught her completely off guard, so she decided to hand the basket of apples to the maid. She also asked the girl to give her a moment, and now Sienna realized that this was the real Baroness Appleton. Now the princess was even more shocked, not understanding who the other woman was, although she hadn't said she was the Baroness. Sienna immediately began to apologize to the old woman for not understanding and for making a mistake that offended her honor and dignity. The girl was so ashamed at that moment that she kept begging for forgiveness for her actions. But the old woman just smiled and then explained that she had hidden her identity voluntarily. She explained that the palace tea party was an opportunity she might never get again. The Baroness understood she needed to go, but her appearance was not what it used to be, and she was afraid people wouldn't respect her after seeing her like this, so it was better not to show up. Appleton understood that if she went to this celebration, everyone present would talk about her. Everyone would judge her, asking how the Baroness could have become so ugly. The old woman admitted that even in her own garden, she often heard similar taunts, which was very hard for her. Then she received another letter, proposing to hide the fact that she was actually the Baroness. It was then that Mark and Lena wondered if she should go, as she knew this was her last chance to go out. The old woman also knew that if she didn't reveal her identity, no one would care about her at all. But then she saw Sienna, who greeted her very politely and invited her to the table. The Baroness noticed that even without makeup, the clothes couldn't hide the girl's noble aura. Appleton was deeply moved that day. She was so impressed by Sienna's grace and courtesy that she wanted to be like that too. After the tea party, the old woman began to study etiquette, even practicing in front of a mirror, thinking about how to thank the girl for the wonderful time. Moreover, Lena really wanted to treat the maid to something from her farm because she was truly grateful for that day. The princess couldn't believe the real Baroness had come to thank a maid. She noticed the posture of her hands, the angle of her bow, and the way her skirt fell. Every movement proclaimed her noble status. Though it was just a greeting, Lena Appleton showed everyone what kind of person she was. The old woman remembered Sienna telling her not to worry about anything and just enjoy herself. The princess realized that this was a person who had grown up with love, because only love could do all this. She then bowed before the Baroness, insisting she was unworthy of such praise. The girl didn't know if she could accept it gracefully, but she had no choice but to receive her gift. Sienna held the basket of apples high, declaring she would always remember the fruit the Baroness had given her. Then she shared the apples with the other maids, one of whom began to wonder why Snow White would eat a poisoned apple. But another said she would eat them even if they were poisoned because they were so sweet, and asked for another. These maids, who worked hard every day and ate black bread, were ecstatic over the honey apples the Baroness had given them. As they ate the fruit, they hailed her as a goddess, shouting how much they loved the lady. Now Sienna herself decided to try the apples and found them to be truly delicious. But now she couldn't shake one question. Who exactly was the woman everyone had mistaken for the Baroness? To Sienna, she looked like a prince, with the same hair color and violet eyes. For a moment, she thought it was the princess inspecting the new maids. Just then, the instructor came in, told them to stop eating, and announced that Sienna was now an official maid. The princess was so shocked she dropped the apple in her hand, as she hadn't expected this at all. Jean immediately started shouting that it couldn't be true, that it was complete nonsense, and no one understood the decision. She demanded the instructor explain everything, who then reminded them of the tea party a few days ago. She then clarified that it was actually a test of the students' abilities and pointed out that there was no question who had done the best. After that, Lip declared the topic closed and ordered Sienna to report to the Ruby Palace at dawn. The instructor explained that the girl would now be serving Princess Aerys and then left. Sienna was stunned. All the other girls wanted to be the head maid, but she, who had come last, was chosen first. The former princess just wanted to blend in, and now all the other maids would hate her guts. She knew she had to get used to this treatment, which made her very depressed. But then she heard her friends congratulating her, saying she was finally free. Some even admitted they were jealous, but were still happy for her. Sienna realized she was just being a downer for no reason. She was still a bit depressed, but if she hadn't stepped in back then, the tea party would have been a complete disaster. The girls also admitted that although they wanted to be the head maid, they wouldn't turn into jealous jerks. Besides, she had brought them those amazing apples, and Sienna thanked them for their support, finding them completely different from the venomous people she knew in the kingdom, and promised to bring them treats after receiving her first salary. Of course, Jean had to chime in with complaints, insulting the other maids in the process. She said they were all crazy to think it wasn't strange for someone with Sienna's suspicious background to be promoted so quickly. But Choo Choo stood up and told Jean she was talking nonsense. Jean trembled with anger, but she still had the nerve to threaten to tell her father about everyone else. Then she stormed off. Although the girls found her behavior despicable, they were happy because now they could share more apples. Jean had yelled at everyone, but the maids quickly forgot about it amidst the good food and chatter. Sienna was glad she didn't have much luggage, though she had never thought she would leave this place. But starting tomorrow, she would be the head maid of the Imperial Palace, and honestly, it was better than being a princess. It was exhausting, she thought, but it was indeed a good job. Just then, there was a knock on the door. It was Choo Choo. Sienna thought something was wrong, but Choo Choo explained that nothing bad had happened. Then, the strong maid handed the former princess a hairpin, explaining it was a gift for her promotion. She also explained that she had picked it in a hurry because time was short, but she hoped she would like it. Choo Choo also said that maids could dress up a little too, and told her not to feel inferior to anyone. Sienna knew that low-ranking maids didn't earn much at all, yet this girl had bought her a gift, spending all her savings. Noticing her friend's thoughtful expression, Choo Choo guessed she didn't like the gift, and said she had specifically asked the shopkeeper to pick the prettiest one. Just then, Sienna lunged forward and gave her a hug. The former princess thanked her, saying it was an amazing gift and that she loved it very, very much. Around Choo Choo, Sienna always felt a sense of warmth. She knew she would miss her, but believed everything would be all right. The next morning, Lip asked a maid if Princess Grace had her own personal maid. The girl said that was her, and explained that she had requested a transfer here herself because it was unbearable over there. She knew it seemed crazy to outsiders, but only those who had been there knew how terrible the job was. The maid said she would rather scrub floors and run errands, and believed that no maid on earth could please that princess. She recalled her terrible experience in that palace and swore that no one in the entire empire could handle her. Later, Sienna was all ready, believing her future would be much better than when she was a princess, and prepared to leave. Just before she was about to go, the same maid suddenly appeared, saying she really didn't want to discourage her, but the job would be a nightmare. She explained that all the previous maids had run away, and she herself had slipped away the first chance she got. Sienna guessed it must be especially hard working alone, and the maid agreed, especially having to keep an eye on the princess at all times. She added that Princess Aerys wasn't just picky. Everyone in the palace thought she was basically a demon in human skin. There was a magnificent palace with a small garden, which the emperor had gifted to a dancer named Rosemary, with whom he had fallen in love at first sight. That was the Ruby Palace, and now the princess she had given birth to lived there, the seventh princess of the empire. Then, the maid led Sienna to the palace, which looked rather gloomy from the outside. Once inside, the maid tried calling for the princess softly, but there was no response. So they continued down the hallway, and the maid knocked on the bedroom door, announcing that the new maid had arrived. Sienna was hoping the princess was just treated as someone with impure blood or the like, but the moment they stepped into the room, a giant, hairy spider appeared before them. The maid who had worked here before immediately started screaming hysterically and then began to feel sick. Just then, Aerys came out, and Sienna found it incredible that she could be so energetic under the circumstances. The princess was holding the spider on a string and asked why the new girl wasn't reacting. Sienna Sienna immediately apologized and said she would be happy to feign whatever reaction the princess wanted to see. So Sienna clutched her head and screamed her lungs out, as if terrified by something. Afterwards, she asked for permission to introduce herself, and after the princess agreed, she gave her a formal greeting. Aerys couldn't help but notice that the new maid wasn't scared at all and couldn't believe her prank hadn't worked. The princess tossed the spider aside and told them to get lost, saying she was sick of all maids. Sienna wasn't sure what had just happened, but the other maids started talking to her as if nothing was wrong. She began to thank Sienna, saying that there had never been a suitable maid to take over before, so she never had a chance to leave. But Sienna still asked what she was supposed to do here, only to find out she just needed to look after the princess, and the rest was up to her. The maid explained that, in any case, there was no one else here besides her and the strange little girl. Sienna knew that all the work now fell on her alone, but since she was here, she had to get to it. She decided to start by cleaning and realized the place hadn't been tidied up in a long time. Everything became clean before her eyes, and soon Sienna discovered the place wasn't actually that gloomy. Just then, the princess came up to her and declared that everything she was doing was pointless, as she didn't care at all whether it was clean or not. So Sienna turned to the little girl and asked what she wanted. But Aerys was angry because she was being treated like a real princess again, as if no one was allowed to do that to her. Then she demanded the newcomer stop her hypocritical act of being nice, and declared she would leave this godforsaken place the first chance she got. Meanwhile, Sol was asking the emperor why he sent Sienna to the Ruby Palace. He believed that things should be done in order and not just on His Majesty's whim. Rashid chimed in, saying the girl could also be invited to his palace, and the guard promised to relay the order to the maid. The emperor reiterated that he could bring Sienna here right now, without even giving her a chance to think. He remembered seeing her at the banquet, especially the way she sweetly bid farewell to the real Duchess. Rashid thought the girl was really sweet, especially when she smiled, and he hoped they could meet again soon, even though the Ruby Palace was far away. Meanwhile, Sienna was explaining to the princess that it was a secret and asked where she had heard it from. She told the child that she was just working here, but if she found a better post, she would definitely leave. For now, however, she would stay and do everything she could to take good care of the princess. Later, she settled Aerys in a bed and brought her food in the morning, but the child refused it, saying the milk and vegetables tasted like poison. The princess then demanded cookies, but Sienna explained that eating snacks instead of a proper meal was bad for her. She also said that if she didn't eat properly, she would always be sick, and for a princess, staying healthy was crucial. Just then, Aerys declared that she was already grown up and knew better, but the maid pointed out that she was nothing but skin and bones. Sienna knew that no matter how difficult Aerys was, it was wrong that no one was willing to bother taking care of her. The princess also claimed the maid was lying because she was already 10 years old, but the maid swore she was telling the truth. Then she reiterated that if she continued like this, she would have serious health problems. Afterwards, she promised the princess some candy if she finished all her breakfast. After breakfast, Aerys didn't want to brush her teeth either, so Sienna threatened to take away her candy for the next day. The next day, the maid opened the windows and found it was a perfect morning, with the sunlight seemingly begging to be let in. But the princess was still lying lazily in bed, wrapped in her blanket, and had even decided to skip breakfast. Sienna managed to drag her up, but after seeing the food, Aerys demanded something decent to eat. The maid explained that this was decent food, and that she herself had eaten a cream bun and some fried chicken. Aerys started yelling again because the maid had eaten everything, but Sienna pointed out that she was just following the royal rules. She added that after mealtime was over, any leftover food belonged to the servants. Now Sienna felt full, and she had also found a way to make the picky child eat. If you make a child hungry enough, they will eat anything. The maid was gobbling up all her food. Sienna remembered being locked in her room for days without food, and now she was executing her plan perfectly. The whole point of the plan was also to find out the princess's favorite food. She ended up gobbling down the entire plate of salad, but Aerys claimed she had just decided not to leave anything for the servant, as she remembered that servants could only eat their master's leftovers. So the child decided to make the maid starve, but Sienna just praised her for doing a good job. Meanwhile, the maid stroked Aerys's hair, pretending to apologize for her rude behavior. She just told her to leave again, but then noticed something in her hair and try to get it out. Meanwhile, Sienna was glad the food issue was resolved, and it was time to deal with the cleaning issue. She invited the princess to take a bath, but the princess started screaming, saying she hated water, bubbles, and rough brushes. The maid then explained that if she didn't bathe, cockroaches would come, because they love all things dirty. She added that these cockroaches would eat skin and hair, and sometimes even excrete on them. But Aerys screamed that it was a lie. The princess declared she had never seen any cockroaches, and then the maid pointed out that the little girl's head was itching. She told the child to listen to the rustling sound, explaining that it was the cockroaches nibbling on things. The princess was terrified, thinking the bugs would eat her, and demanded the maid give her a bath immediately. At first, the loofah felt rough, but the longer she scrubbed, the more comfortable it felt. Later, some foam got in her eyes, but Aerys didn't feel any sting. She just liked the smell of rosemary. Sienna used the same trick to get her to brush her teeth, saying that cockroaches would eat teeth with food residue stuck to them. Soon, Aerys said this maid was driving her crazy, and she complained that she was exhausted and had no energy left. Sienna just praised the princess for doing a good job and told her she needed a good night's sleep to recover her energy. But Aerys started yelling, saying she had been annoying her all day and didn't want to be bothered by her while she slept. The princess declared she would sleep whenever she wanted, and the maid admitted she just wanted her to fall asleep quickly. Sienna also confessed that she knew an interesting story, but if the princess wasn't interested, she would leave. But Aerys stopped her and asked her to tell the story, and the maid agreed. Sienna began, a long time ago, there lived a diamond princess who loved jewels more than anything. She collected jewels from all over the world, and then one day, she decided to cover her entire body with them to make herself shine brighter than the sun. But then she heard that a dragon living in the west possessed the most beautiful diamond in the world. The princess desired it so much that she traveled alone through thorn bushes and swamps. When she reached the castle, the dragon saw how beautiful she was and offered the diamond in exchange for her hand in marriage. Just then, Sienna noticed Aerys starting to yawn, and in a little while, she was fast asleep. The maid wished the little girl sweet dreams, gave her a kiss, and promised herself that she would raise her to be the healthiest she could be. Sienna understood that this was the duty of Princess Aerys's personal maid. A lot had changed since Sienna came to this palace, but the little girl was starting to be mischievous again. The princess also ran across the flower bed, but the maid said, "Hey, don't run. I just planted those. The seeds will get hurt." Aerys asked what kind of flowers they were, and the maid casually listed a bunch of names. She went on to say that the sunlight here was just right, the soil was fertile, and if watered properly, they would bloom magnificently. The maid then promised to make a beautiful flower crown for the princess once the buds bloomed. During this time, the child had been wondering why Sienna always treated her like she was the only princess in the world. What is this maid's goal? Aerys thought. She felt the maid must be hiding something, a secret. The princess wondered what she was after, but then she noticed the maid just gave her a sweet smile. Then Aerys found a hairpin on the ground and put it in her hair. When Sienna saw it, her face instantly turned cold. It was the hairpin from Choo Choo, and no matter how busy she was, she couldn't lose it. So she approached the princess and explained apologetically that the hairpin was actually hers. The girl also explained that she must have dropped it accidentally while tending to the flower bed and then asked for it back. But the little rascal had no intention of giving it up easily, saying that if she wanted it back, she would have to come and get it herself. Then Aerys ran off, confident that the maid would never catch her. No one ever had. But soon, the girl found the maid was about to catch up to her, and she couldn't understand how she could be so fast. They eventually stopped by the fountain, and after stopping, Sienna explained that it was wrong to snatch things and run away. Then she asked the girl to return the hairpin, and Aerys thought with frustration that all the things she had said were just empty promises. The girl was upset that Sienna had promised to take care of her, and now she threw the hairpin into the water. She remembered a maid who had approached the princess, hugged her, and promised that as her servant, she would do anything Aerys commanded. The girl thanked her, instantly feeling warm and secure, as if her mother had returned. Then that maid was arrested for being accused of stealing and selling items from the palace, for which she would have to answer in court. As they dragged the maid away, she kept pleading with the princess for help, but the princess only said, "It's an order." The next maid also packed her bags quickly and bluntly told the princess she was useless and completely worthless. After that, the girl was all alone, and she suddenly realized that without her mother, she was no princess at all. She was nothing. Even with such a messy family background, she never thought she would be completely useless. But even her wet nurse had left because she was too picky. Now Sienna was before her, who was also supposed to serve her. And just then, the girl woke up. She knew it was just a nightmare, but the truth was that everyone would leave her. When she didn't see Sienna, she thought she had left too. Aerys thought she must have packed her things and left last night, so she wanted to know in advance if she was going to be abandoned, so it wouldn't hurt as much. Just then, the maid came in reciting a silly poem, noticing the princess was up unusually early. But seeing the strange look on the girl's face, she knew she had a nightmare and told her she could go back to sleep for a while. Sienna also explained to the child that people don't feel hungry when they're sleepy, so their digestive system also stops working. But Aerys couldn't believe that after everything that had happened, they hadn't abandoned her. The princess immediately ran over and hugged her, then admitted she really didn't want to do what she did. The little girl also apologized, pleading with the maid not to hate her for throwing away the hairpin. Sienna assured her that everything was fine, but Aerys still couldn't believe it. The maid explained that little kids just do things like that sometimes. Meanwhile, the girl admitted she was glad the princess could apologize sincerely. The girl also confessed that she knew how unpleasant this palace must be for Sienna, with so many chores and her being all alone. Then she suddenly promised the maid that she would help her with everything, listen to her, and share her candy. Aerys was willing to do anything as long as this maid didn't leave her. Sienna agreed to help her grow into a proper princess. From that day on, the princess really changed a lot. She would help water the flower beds or try to clean the room. Sienna was worried it would be hard on the little one, but she didn't give up and was actually doing quite well. Sienna kept trying to make her understand that children have more important things to do than cleaning and laundry. The maid explained to the princess that she was referring to studying. The child was even a little upset by this, but Sienna reminded her that she had promised to be a good girl. The servant explained to the girl that she didn't need to learn any difficult subjects yet, but her handwriting had to be perfect. Then she wanted to get a pen and paper, but when she opened the drawer, she found that what she needed wasn't there. The maid promised she would find what was needed quickly and be right back. She then asked the clerk for some pens and paper, but he refused, saying he couldn't just give those things to anyone. Sienna explained it was for the princess's lessons, but he had dealt with maids before who asked for things under the pretext of for the princess. He also told her that if she needed anything, she had to get permission from the emperor himself. The girl knew no one would give her permission and was about to lose her mind when Aerys asked if she should tell Rashid's brother. Only then did Sienna remember the crown prince, and then she wondered if they were close. The princess said he was on good terms with her mother, but wasn't sure if it would be the same with her. The maid thought that if Rashid was curious, he would definitely take the bait, so they had to give it a try. She then suggested the princess write him a letter, and before long, he appeared, asking how they were doing. Aerys didn't know why he had come, saying he could have just sent someone with the permission. Rashid explained that he had received the letter saying his little sister needed help, so he decided to deliver the permission himself. He also pointed out that when a guest arrives, one should first greet them and offer them a cup of tea. The maid immediately apologized, saying she couldn't serve tea because they had run out. But the crown prince told her not to worry, saying he had brought everything, and told her the brand of tea to go and brew. Sienna never thought she would meet the emperor in this way in the imperial palace, and she noticed Rashid was staring at her, and she wondered if he still remembered her after Cain. She also noticed the way he held his teacup. The movements looked very familiar. The princess loved the tea, saying she had never had anything so delicious, and praised it for not being hot at all. The girl explained it was because the crown prince's tea was good, but he said the princess's tea was also very good. At that moment, the girl felt that the emperor recognized her, and the little princess also felt like they knew each other. Rashid was surprised Sienna hadn't mentioned him, and then admitted that he was the one who had hired the girl as a maid and sent her here. Aerys started asking why he did it, and her brother explained that he found the maid to be lovely. Just then, a guard approached the emperor, reminding him of an upcoming royal visit, so they needed to leave. Rashid was frustrated that he hadn't even finished his tea, but Sol pointed out in surprise that he had already emptied his cup. The crown prince then handed his sister a document. She asked how she could repay him, but he insisted that a cup of tea was enough. Afterwards, His Majesty thanked the maid for the delicious tea, and she thanked him in return. Just then, Aerys told her brother to stay away from other people's maids and demanded that he get lost quickly. The crown prince finally admitted he had been trying not to be so forceful, and after he left, Sienna realized how close the siblings were. But the little princess retorted that their relationship was actually terrible. The maid also noticed that the princess spoke well with her brother after getting the document, but she claimed it was just a small transaction. The girl also explained that although her brother had agreed, he had put her in his debt because they were competing for the throne. Sienna had previously thought the crown prince was the only heir to the empire, but a lot had changed. This also meant that the power struggle between the siblings was still ongoing. Aerys was feeling quite good now, even though she had no family or mother to support her. The girl also confessed that she didn't want this fate, but at the same time, she was happy to take on the challenge of her destiny. Now Sienna understood that she had been wrong to initially think the siblings had a good relationship. If they truly cared for each other, he wouldn't have treated the princess's feelings as nothing. Sienna knew that being a princess in any royal family was terrible. You had to give up your childhood to be worthy of the throne. She wondered how she could bear that burden alone, and then Aerys asked if she wanted more tea. The maid also recalled that in this crazy world, all she had ever wanted was a simple life. Meanwhile, Sol was asking the crown prince if he was interested in Sienna, saying her big eyes made her look like a squirrel. And then His Majesty started thinking about taking the maid for himself and asked his guard if he had noticed any changes. Around the palace, he admitted that it was noticeably cleaner and that he had also seen Princess Aerys looking much better than before. They both agreed that the maid was doing a good job, and then the crown prince pushed Sol away for being in the way. Rashid also said that he was glad Aerys had finally opened up to Sienna and that she didn't judge people based on their titles or power. He also noted that the maid was easygoing and good with people, although that wasn't enough to earn true trust. Then His Majesty remembered his sister, who was just as active when she was still in the womb. Rosemary even had him touch her belly, and he saw for himself how hard the baby kicked. Rashid then added that all the cute parts were left in Aerys, while admitting that he liked the tea Sienna brewed. Meanwhile, the maid asked the princess if His Majesty would be visiting them often from now on, but she didn't know. A little later, Sienna ran into Choo Choo near the warehouse, and the girls were very happy to see each other. The strong girl noticed that her friend looked a bit pale, while she also noticed that Choo Choo had gotten stronger. She confessed that she was now training hard to build muscle, and then asked how Sienna was doing. The girl adjusted the gifted hairpin she was wearing again and briefly told her about her recent situation. Recently, the emperor came to visit her and Aerys again, saying he was just stopping by. He also brought them a cake with lots of filling and chocolate, claiming it was for the princess. Afterward, he requested that Sienna serve him today, and the girl couldn't defy his order. While she was brewing the delicious tea, Aerys decided to wait for it to be ready to have it with the cake. Once everything was ready, the princess found the dessert to be very delicious, and she thanked her brother. Then the little one declared that it was unfair to ask for her company in exchange for just 2 cups of tea. So she asked her brother to grant her another request, explaining that she had recently dropped a maid's hairpin into the water. His Majesty understood what his sister wanted and promised to do it for her. Sienna, who overheard, was somewhat surprised. Soon, the servants drained the fountain, revealing the bottom, and then they began searching for the lost item. Choo Choo couldn't believe that 100 soldiers were doing this, but Sienna assured her that was exactly what was happening. Even before that, the maid had received another confirmation from the crown prince, as she needed to sew new clothes for Aerys. She needed high-quality fabric, and when the fabric shop owner saw the crown prince's seal on the letter, he was completely stunned. So she succeeded, and knowing that a maid needed extreme stamina, she worked hard and completed the task. That night, as Sienna was dragging the fabric back, she felt someone pushing from behind. Giving her a push, but when she turned around, she saw Emperor Rashid standing there with a sincere smile. She immediately apologized for not recognizing him and greeted him, and he asked why there was so much on the cart. His Majesty then told the maid to raise her head, explaining that he just wanted to help, but she didn't understand why. Rashid explained again that she was so petite and the cart was so big, so he thought he would give her a hand. After telling her friend all this, Sienna decided to say goodbye, worried that the princess would start looking for her. But then Choo-Choo confessed her suspicions, thinking the crown prince had some kind of mental problem and was definitely a madman. She added that the lives of low-ranking maids were worth less than flies, and that they were nothing more than slave laborers anyway. Choo-Choo also admitted she was worried because Rashid might lose control around Sienna, and that she should get a job at the Ruby Palace too. But the former princess thought that despite her friend's talent, they would never send her there, even if she could become an official maid. Just as the girls were saying goodbye, Aerys walked over and asked, "What took you so long, Sienna?" "I'm starving." The maid reported that she had prepared snacks for the princess before she left, and Aerys explained that she had already eaten all 10 cookies. Then the little rascal grabbed the maid's hand and begged her to come back because she was really hungry. As they were leaving, Aerys shot Choo-Choo a nasty glare, so Sienna thought they wouldn't be sending another maid to the Ruby Palace. Back at the palace, the princess guessed that the maid liked this Choo-Choo so much because she was tall and strong. The girl explained that she was one of the trainees, adding that she liked her because she was very kind and helpful. Sienna also confirmed that Choo-Choo was really strong and could carry several sacks with one arm. After that, the princess asked the maid to make meat and milk today, declaring that she was no longer a child and it was time to change her diet. The girl thought to herself that the little rascal was quite cute when she was angry, but then she heard a familiar voice behind her again. The emperor and his entourage approached, and the princess immediately wanted to know what he was doing here again. Rashid said he just wanted to check on them, but she retorted that after visiting 5 times, he should know very well. He then presented a dessert, explaining that it was a fresh cream sponge cake made with the finest white milk. And the cake was also decorated with fresh fruit, and the crown prince had brought tea again. Aerys, who had a sweet tooth, thought that since he brought a cake, he could stay this time. Rashid told Sienna to be careful, but all she could think about was how suspiciously friendly he was being. Nevertheless, she invited them in, all the while thinking that the emperor had gone completely mad. As he entered the building, the guard glanced back as if he had noticed something, but didn't see the cloaked figure hiding in the corner. It was his sister who had decided to follow him, and now saw her brother heading to the Ruby Palace. She went to see the 5th princess, Yvette, again, reporting that the crown prince had brought a pile of sweets for Princess Aerys this time. She was just angry that his majesty kept coming to this place, which annoyed her. With her was the emperor's 5th wife, Leova Suindiaro, who thought the little girl was just a pitiful child, but Yvette was still angry because her own status was higher, and she didn't understand why she didn't deserve all this. The princess didn't understand why Rashid was so friendly to Aerys, since the girl was a complete loser, so she decided that in order to get her brother's attention, she had to meet the girl herself. So she wrote her a letter saying she wanted to meet for a chat over tea. Aerys realized that Yvette was planning a surprise attack, which annoyed her, and she told her maid about it. Sienna thought she was tormenting the little princess, knowing that she would only mock and belittle her for her clothes at the meeting. But the girl also understood why, because she didn't know any etiquette and felt like she was just a princess in shell only. The maid told her not to think that way, saying she had her by her side and promised to get Aerys ready for the tea party. Sienna was ready to tell the princess everything and rushed to get some books, but the child couldn't understand it all. Aerys couldn't figure out how a common maid would know these things, so Sienna explained that she had been a princess's exclusive maid until now. Sienna felt the child didn't want to learn, but she needed to know at least basic table manners. She had to learn, or she wouldn't last a day in the palace. Sienna began by saying that you can't drink tea until the host takes the first sip. Also, you must be quiet while drinking, and after taking a sip, you must immediately return the cup to the saucer. And you can't make a sound when putting it back. Princess Aerys thought it all sounded too complicated. Nevertheless, she tried it, and to her surprise, she did it perfectly. The maid immediately praised her. Next, the girl practiced thanking the other person for the good tea and was praised again by her teacher. Sienna was glad the girl was focused and did everything perfectly. She was a fast learner. To encourage her further, the maid started calling the princess a genius, a title she quite liked. Unlike nobles who enjoyed flattery, royalty had to be proud or they would be pushed around. Meanwhile, the emperor dropped by unannounced and immediately noticed that his sister now drank tea differently. His Majesty could see that Aerys's demeanor had changed as well. He then glanced at the maid, knowing she was the one who taught her. Sienna had hoped the crown prince wouldn't notice anything and was a little uneasy that he actually did. Still, the maid owed the princess, so she was confident she could handle it and prepared for a positive outcome. Soon, the etiquette training was over, and the next day Sienna decided to decorate the little princess's dress. Aerys was surprised that the maid had sewn the dress herself, and Sienna admitted she wanted her to look flawless. The maid hoped the princess would like it and asked how she felt in the new dress. The girl just twirled in front of the maid and asked how she looked, and then both were satisfied. They went to get ready. By this time, Yvette was already waiting for them, thinking her little sister would be in her usual tattered clothes today. She remembered scolding Aerys for eating with her hands, thinking she was just a disgusting commoner. Yvette thought it would be exactly the same as before, and she could make fun of her sister again, which made her feel good. But little Aerys was late, and the fifth princess was getting impatient, annoyed that she hadn't shown up yet. Then she heard a child's voice behind her, thanking her for the invitation to tea. Turning around, she couldn't believe her eyes. The little dirtbag now looked like a princess. Sienna chimed in that Aerys was as beautiful as a fairy from a myth. She was just basking in her own beauty, convinced she was beautiful because she looked like her mother. The maid repeated that she would be the most charming person at the tea party and could win this battle by capturing everyone's gaze. Seeing her sister's shocked expression, Aerys asked what was wrong, smiling sweetly as if to deliberately annoy Yvette. The girl remembered her maid's advice. Keep smiling, because a smile always gives you the upper hand right at the entrance. Aerys also noticed her sister's face had turned pale, but she just said it was nice to see her after so long. Yvette even found it amusing to watch the little one play princess, but still invited her to sit at the table. The fifth princess admitted she had a lot of news and also commented that her sister looked like a human being now. Meanwhile, she was wondering what had happened to the monster she had seen last time. Then, she saw how carefully the maid was taking care of the girl and concluded that all these changes were because of her. But to her sister, Yvette declared she was glad she had finally grown up, then gave a condescending order. She pointed out that her cup was empty and demanded it be refilled, and the maid came over to pour the tea. But Yvette protested that it shouldn't be a servant pouring it, but her sister herself. The girl remembered that although she had learned etiquette, she hadn't had any lessons on pouring tea. Aerys realized her sister was trying to find fault with her in any way she could, but picked up the teapot anyway. The little princess knew that if things went on like this, she had no choice but to do it herself. So she knocked over the teacup, splashing it on Yvette, who jumped up in shock. Aerys just politely apologized, saying her hand had suddenly twitched, but Yvette started yelling that she had hurt her. Now, Yvette pulled rank as the older sister, ready to punish the little rascal, and raised her hand to strike her. But the maid stopped her, looming over her like a storm cloud, telling her to stop, while Aerys just watched from behind her. The fifth princess was stunned by the maid's actions, who then pleaded with her to forgive her sister, saying she saw she had set a trap. Sienna also added that it was the law that no one could punish a member of the royal family without a direct order from His Majesty. Yvette was furious that this maid was trying to lecture her on family rules, despite her higher status. That was just a formality that no one really followed, so the weak were meant to be trampled on. Avita knew very well that no one cared about those rules, and now a maid was trying to use them against her. Nevertheless, she admitted the girl was shrewd, so even if her sister had learned etiquette, it was really thanks to that maid. She then walked up to Sienna, questioning how she dared to touch a royal and declaring she deserved to be punished. Just then, her own maid appeared and started shouting that this maid was trying to humiliate the royal family. She then pushed Sienna to the ground, while Sienna just thanked her for teaching her the rules. A stunned Aerys didn't know what to say, especially since she was just a child, but they decided to leave. As they left, the fifth princess shouted that she hoped to see them again and told her sister to shut up. After Sienna and the little one got into the carriage, Aerys asked the maid why she did that, but Sienna didn't know what she was referring to. The little princess understood that the maid had suffered because of her, taking all the blows, but the woman had protected her. Then Aerys suggested they treat the wounds first. When they arrived at the palace, Aerys began dabbing at the wound with a wet cotton pad, and Sienna realized the princess had never done this before. The little girl became flustered, but Sienna reassured her it was okay and decided to teach the child how to properly treat a wound. Sienna explained that first, you have to disinfect the cotton swab, then dab it lightly on the wound. Just then, she noticed the princess starting to cry, thinking she was just angry about what happened today. Aerys admitted she was a little angry, but Sienna explained that Aerys was a princess just like Yvette, so she didn't need to be afraid. The maid then added that anything could be done and asked the little one if she wanted to punish her sister. Aerys completely agreed, but she was worried about her maid, and Sienna told her not to worry. Sienna promised she would teach her everything, telling her exactly what to do, because she understood the princess very well now. She then asked the little girl why this had happened, and Aerys guessed it was because she was younger than Yvette. The girl couldn't believe it was all because of age and her low title, so Sienna asked how titles were decided anyway. Aerys explained that it was the difference between having and not having, that Yvette had power, wealth, and support, while she had none. So the maid asked her again, making sure the child understood exactly why this had happened. Aerys realized the maid's good intentions, and then Sienna added that she needed to win the support of the adults to become stronger. The maid explained that this was the fastest and most realistic way for the princess to influence the royal family. The maid also promised to always have her back, but she needed to find someone with great power first. The girl didn't know how to find him, but Sienna said there was a way, and he would most likely be on her side. Meanwhile, a guard reported to the emperor that the maid was moving about sneakily. She had been seen leaving in a carriage. Sol also guessed she had gone to see Princess Yvette, which made Rashid angry that he hadn't been told about it sooner. The guard stopped him, explaining what would happen if he interfered in the rivalry between two princesses. He added that Sienna could also get hurt and that Aerys was her master, plus she was also a contender for the throne. Sol also added that the crown prince was a strong candidate, so the princesses might not even bother to compete at all. He even said his own mother would have wanted it that way, but the man retorted that Sol was a good friend, but he wouldn't listen to that nonsense. The guard then apologized to His Majesty for what he had said, while Rashid thought about how Sienna genuinely cared for Aerys. In any case, he was still confused as to why he cared so much. Then he remembered that even when he was a teenager, he was already the top contender for the throne. No matter how much people supported him, there was one person in the empire who was much more powerful than him. That was Empress Gulria, and because of that woman, his power was basically meaningless. Meanwhile, Sienna was also explaining to the princess that the most powerful person around was Empress Gulria. She was the one the girl needed to win over to her side, but the princess didn't know how to do it. She felt the empress wouldn't want to see her, but Sienna explained that they would create a situation where Gulria would want to meet. The woman revealed that the empress had another daughter, but she died from poisoning before she was even 10. The same poison was also used on the current emperor, and the story was that the little princess died after accidentally swallowing the poison. And His Majesty, instead of mourning his dead daughter, decided to cover up the whole thing. Of course, she punished those who tried to kill her daughter and son and used it as an excuse to eliminate her political enemies. In the end, she consolidated the crown prince's allies, making him the current emperor. But that wasn't all. Sienna suggested that although Gulria seemed like a person with a heart of stone, every mother's heart aches for her daughter. The woman thus became estranged from her own son and then, over time, completely closed herself off. The girl could already imagine the old empress's reaction upon receiving news about the little princess. And although Aerys was still convinced it was hopeless, Sienna kept assuring her that this was a perfect opportunity for them. She then had the little girl write a letter about how much she missed her mother. Soon, the letter was delivered to Her Majesty Gulria, but she immediately tore it in half after reading it. But they didn't give up at the Ruby Palace. and soon Aerys sent another letter to the Empress. Gulria didn't even bother to read it and just ordered it to be thrown away immediately. She did the same with the next few letters. The child knew she was being rejected every time, but she kept writing, never stopping in her hope to see her. Finally, the Empress decided to actually read one of the little princess's letters. As Sienna had planned, the letter even had a peach scent, which was a bit childish. Sienna knew Gulria was old-fashioned, so using more elegant language would have been better. But she had Aerys write to the Empress like a granddaughter who thought of her as a spring flower. The girl was young, and she didn't understand how an elderly person would. Like that kind of thing. Sienna just told her to be patient, and soon they received a reply written in the style of the great poet the Empress favored. Aerys just told the maid to keep her voice down and asked how much longer they had to write these silly letters. The girl told the princess not to worry, fully believing the Empress would summon her at any moment. She also noticed that her writing style was like that of the Ruby Palace, while Gulria asked the maid what this princess was really like. Sienna, the maid, was still waiting for an answer when Aerys rushed down from upstairs in a new dress. Immediately after, the girl tripped and tumbled down the stairs, falling at the bottom, to Sienna's horror. The maid didn't understand why she was in such a hurry, but the princess just handed her an envelope. The servant wasn't sure what the letter was about, and then Aerys explained that her grandmother had invited her to the palace. Soon they were ready and arrived at the meeting place with the Empress, and the princess politely thanked her for the invitation. Gulria greeted her granddaughter in a rather cold voice, but it was clear she was not happy to see her. The girl then approached her and explained that she had prepared a small gift as a token of her gratitude. The princess took out a small bottle, explaining that it was tea made from acacia flowers. Aerys had heard that the Empress liked flower tea, so she had specially brewed a pot for her. The little one then humbly asked her grandmother to accept the gift if she didn't mind. Gulria noticed that the girl did have that aura, and she saw the violet eyes, just like His Highness's. Although Aerys was the youngest in the entire family, those eyes proclaimed her royal blood. The Empress then admitted it was a unique gift and invited her granddaughter to have a cup with her. As soon as they were seated at the table, Her Majesty commented that the tea was truly delicious. The princess thanked her, very happy that her grandmother liked it, and then they continued their conversation. Just like in the letters they had been sending, Aerys didn't complain about her life, but instead praised the Empress. Their conversation was somewhat aimless, but the sight of the two of them together was rather luxurious. They both silently put down their cups, stirred their tea with spoons, and held back laughter while drinking. Aerys's court etiquette was impeccable, without a single flaw. She even covered her mouth at times when she spoke. The child recited poetry in a beautiful voice with perfect posture, everything learned just for this day. Aerys also mentioned how beautiful the flowers in the garden were, and Gulria decided she could have any flower she wanted. This made the princess overjoyed, and she thanked Her Majesty the Empress again with a lovely smile blooming on her face. The Empress thought that the child was truly beautiful, then announced that it was getting late and sent her back. The princess looked a little flustered and apologized for taking up so much of Her Majesty the Empress's time. Then, the little one thanked her one last time and returned to her own palace, hoping everything would go smoothly. This reminded Gulria of how her own daughter used to apologize for bothering her before leaving. Her imperial princess would always give her a sweet and sincere smile that she could never forget. Her daughter's premature death had also left Her Majesty the Empress heartbroken, something that had haunted her for years. Then she took another close look at little Aerys and became even more certain. She looked exactly like her. Back at the palace, Sienna noticed the princess seemed lost in thought and asked her what was wrong. Aerys explained that she had previously thought the Empress was a cold and heartless person, but now she was discovering that wasn't the case. The maid then noticed a big change in the princess's personality. She was playing the role of an adorable child, making it hard not to smile. But there was another problem, and that was the guilt. If this was causing Aerys so much pain, it would be best to stop. Sienna asked if she felt guilty for deceiving the Countess, but Aerys admitted she felt no such thing. Aerys explained that during their time together, the Countess hadn't asked a single thing about the princess herself throughout their entire conversation. After all, a girl who had lost her mother should have drawn some interest for her beauty or her knowledge, right? But to Gulria, what mattered more was how much the little girl resembled her late daughter. If that woman knew the real her, she would never have smiled so sweetly at the little girl. So yes, the princess basically wanted her grandmother to go to hell. It even made her a little angry, but after calming down, she asked her maid how she did today. Sienna admitted the little one had done wonderfully and that she was proud of her. Hearing this praise, Aerys opened her arms and hugged the maid. Meanwhile, the maid realized that instead of finding support for the princess, she was causing her to lose herself. She also felt the plan was too cruel, but she had no other choice. Recently, she had run into His Majesty again late at night in the garden and immediately thanked him for his help. The girl explained that thanks to him, she was able to get what she wanted, and then she decided to ask him something. Sienna wanted to know about the Emperor's mother's late daughter, and he couldn't refuse her. And so, the girl learned from the crown prince about the countess's daughter, and how the Empress's memories were closely tied to the late princess's appearance. Also, that she loved the Sin of Acacia, what color dresses she liked to wear, and what poems she liked to read. This would severely disrupt the Empress's thoughts, and it would be enough to strike a chord with a grieving mother. And so, Empress Gulria would become infatuated with a false substitute for her late daughter. Sienna asked the crown prince how she could repay his help, but he said she didn't have to do anything. The only thing he wanted to know was why, out of all the people in the palace, she had chosen Empress Gulria. Rashid then clarified it was just a question. He was just really curious. Sienna confessed that it was her plan back when she was just a maid trying to survive next to a powerless princess. She thought she could find some support and started digging for dirt on the royal family. Just like now, she wanted to use the Empress's grief over her lost daughter. The plan was similar, and thinking about it now, Sienna realized she never would have had a chance to get close to the Empress from that far away, so she wasn't suited for the job. But thanks to His Majesty's help, she was able to enter the Empire, and thus Princess Aerys was able to carry out that plan, and it was all thanks to the Emperor. Rashid asked if she was blaming everything on him, but she confessed she only blamed her abusive family. But instead of being depressed about it, she had been plotting her escape, and now she was very excited about it. The Emperor found it really strange that she didn't blame the people who killed her family and was instead excited. Also, he thought her face was a bit cute, but with a wild side. Now Sienna knew that if her plan succeeded, it would be time to move on to the next stage. Soon, Yvette received another letter from her sister and concluded that the girl had gone completely mad. A little while later, she went to visit her. Aerys thanked her for accepting the invitation to her tea party. Yvette was really surprised because just 3 months ago, this girl was like a beggar, but now she was completely different. Then, the fifth princess asked her to pour some tea, explaining that this time she wanted that maid to serve her. Yvette reminded the maid that she had messed up last time and asked if she realized what she had done wrong. She knew she was just a low-ranking maid and thought it would be easy to provoke her. Sienna poured the tea perfectly, but Yvette started complaining again about why she was staring at her. The maid just apologized, but the fifth princess kept insisting she was blatantly glaring at her. Then Yvette decided that the maid was angry with her, but Sienna denied it. Afterwards, the princess explained to her little sister that this maid needed to be taught a lesson since she didn't learn last time. Then she ordered a whip to be brought, but Aerys demanded her sister stop, saying she would never forgive her if she touched Sienna again. Yvette got even angrier, not understanding how this little brat dared to act this way towards her now that she had her grandmother's help. She admitted she knew everything and then decided to share something the little girl didn't know. Yvette asked Aerys why she thought she could rely on the Empress, even if she was His Majesty's biological mother. She also said that the person the girl was relying on had no power, as the Emperor hadn't spoken to her in a long time. The fifth princess confessed that everyone except little Aerys knew that Rashid inheriting the throne was a done deal. She couldn't wait to see that woman fall and thought the child was foolish for choosing someone who flattered her. Just then, Her Majesty the Empress appeared, surprised to hear such foul language coming from a young lady's mouth. Yvette was completely stunned and speechless, not understanding why the Empress was here. Aerys immediately ran to her grandmother and tried to explain, while the Empress asked what was going on. The little one explained that she was hosting her first tea party and had invited her sister, but she felt she had messed it up and admitted she was ashamed. Then, the little princess also pointed out that there wasn't a single adult in her palace to teach her things properly. The Empress looked at the girl, realized she had no mother, and promised to help her. While Yvette was wondering how Gulria dared to show up, she began to scold her for insulting a child. She yelled that the fifth princess was completely looking down on the child, all while treating Aerys like an innocent little lamb. Then Her Majesty the Empress snatched the whip and struck the so-called princess's hand. She had heard that Yvette wanted to punish a maid, so she decided to teach her how it should be done. Just then, the fifth princess began to claim she was a descendant of His Majesty, so Gulria couldn't touch her without the Emperor's permission. But Her Majesty the Empress thought, "This brat dares to threaten me with my own son," which really set her off. The Empress told Yvette she could go ask anyone what they thought about it. She didn't care. Even if her son disagreed with her decision, he wouldn't ignore his sister's disgusting behavior. Then she ordered Yvette to lift her skirt quickly, and she couldn't defy the command. Next, she was struck on the ankle, which made her lose her mind and call Gulria a crazy old hag. After that, she was struck again, harder, and began to scream that her mother wouldn't let her get away with this. Just then, she appeared and immediately wanted to know what on earth was going on. But upon seeing the Empress, she simply thanked her for personally taking charge of her daughter's education. Then she told Yvette to thank the Empress Dowager at once as well. The fifth princess couldn't believe it. She really hadn't expected things to turn out this way. Nevertheless, she bowed before Her Majesty the Empress, thanked her, and admitted it was all her fault. Soon, Aerys was glad that her sister had been so useful, even though she had made her break out in a cold sweat earlier. Sienna was also glad she had asked for her help before leaving, but she wanted to know if the little one was okay. She confessed she wanted to ask her something. She was curious why her mother was forced to die. The girl had learned from the records that when she begged for help, no one had lent a hand. Her mother was very ill at the time, but for some reason, the doctors refused to come and treat her. Aerys didn't dare ask her grandmother about it now, knowing she needed her desperately, and besides, a princess wouldn't ask such a thing. Seeing the little one so upset, Sienna explained that it was okay to cry if she needed to. Although Sienna wished Aerys's heart wouldn't break, she knew there was a wound there that couldn't be healed. The girl was still crying, screaming that she hated everyone and wished they would all die. The maid felt her plan had failed. The former commoner who had seduced the emperor not only gained his affection, but also became a member of the royal family. She was already pregnant by then and worried that the emperor's mother would dismiss her like everyone else. After Gulria announced she wanted nothing to do with His Majesty, Rosemary gave birth to a child. It was a beautiful princess, and the palace was decorated with jewels and filled with people. The palace at that moment was a far cry from reality, and Rosemary apologized to her daughter, saying that all that truly existed here was hypocrisy and malice. Now, even though the palace was a battlefield, Sienna wanted to use the person who had killed the princess's mother. She knew the child didn't owe her any affection, so she just held the girl, feeling very sorry for her. Then Aerys herself hugged the maid and asked what to do next, indicating she was going to squeeze every bit of value out of the old hag. The maid knew that although it was twisted and cruel, they would enhance the power of both the princess and the emperor's mother. After some time, Gulria, worried that her granddaughter hadn't visited since the tea party, decided to visit her. When she arrived at the Ruby Palace, the maid reported that someone had tried to poison Princess Aerys. The Empress immediately rushed to her granddaughter, and Sienna added that the little one had received a poisoned dessert as a gift. Fortunately, the poison wasn't fatal and wouldn't last long, and the doctor assured them the girl would recover soon. Despite this, the princess's body was still weak and hadn't improved, and Sienna also confessed she couldn't get in touch with His Majesty. The maid started to apologize, but the Empress told her to stop, knowing she was the one to blame. Then she held the little girl, telling her to get well soon and not to worry about anything. Yvette even heard the news and gloated that her sister couldn't even get out of bed. She claimed it was because she had talked back and explained that this is what happens to people who try to scare her. When she shared this with her mother, a servant came in to report that the emperor's mother had sent her a gift. Gulria had a message relayed that it was for her favorite granddaughter and that she hoped they would forget what had happened. But the dessert was actually a warning that all of Yvette's actions would come back to haunt her. The Empress also demanded that the princess eat every last bite of the dessert, as she had poured her heart into it. Yvette and her mother took Her Majesty the Empress's warning to heart and disappeared from the history of the royal family forever after. Afterwards, Gulria frequently visited Aerys and took care of her so she could recover quickly. The girl explained that she was much better and that Her Majesty the Empress didn't need to visit so often. Her Majesty the Empress understood the girl needed rest and promised to visit her again later. This tea is a bit bitter, Aerys thought. The maid explained it was because of the herbs in it. The princess didn't understand why she had to pretend to be on the verge of death, and the maid said that poisoning was no joke. Aerys said it was just a little stomachache, saying Yvette had always sent her things like this. She also admitted she usually just threw them away, but now she felt she could use it to her advantage. Moreover, Aerys wanted to use her grandmother, and when the time was right, she would ask her why she hadn't helped her mother back then. The little one felt like a bad person, but she was still happy that things were going well now. The maid told her that you can't survive in the imperial palace by trying to be a good person. Then the princess hugged her maid again, pleading with her to never leave her side. Just then, Sienna remembered again asking Rashid what she could do to repay his help. He kept saying he didn't need anything, but she kept pressing, and he couldn't think of anything to ask for. So he asked the maid to move into his palace, and Sienna froze, completely speechless. Shortly after, a pair of twin maids appeared, carrying a pile of dresses for the princess to try on. Sienna looked at them and thought the pink one would suit Aerys, but the blue one would look even better. The maid was in a bit of a bind, as both outfits were gorgeous, and now she couldn't choose which was best. But then the princess came out and told those maids to stop bothering her own maid. They agreed and then started asking Aerys which dress she liked best herself. The girl declared that she looked good in anything, and the seamstresses agreed. They were even surprised that she was so shrewd at such a young age, and Aerys confirmed it. Yes, she was smart. After they left, the princess got angry, muttering that she hated all women except Sienna. But the maid explained to her that if they wanted to stay together for a long time, they would need help from others. She also said it was in case the princess needed something and she was busy, or just as a backup. Then Sienna promised that she would find maids who loved the little one as much as she did. After that, a pair of twins named Nini and Nana were sent to the palace, and they would be working here from now on. They swore to serve the princess faithfully, and Sienna explained they could be trusted because they were friends of Choo Choo. But the girl didn't like that they looked exactly alike, because she wouldn't be able to tell who was who. As the days went by, the new maids constantly praised the princess, saying she was beautiful and elegant. They also took great care of Aerys, explaining that she had to stay healthy and graceful. Sienna was glad everything was going well, and the princess was growing into a rather confident girl. She herself was going to visit the crown prince, where desserts were prepared for her, as she was considered an honored guest. The maids took great care of her until His Majesty the Emperor arrived. Meanwhile, the maid looked around and noticed the living room had a high ceiling and felt more like a garden. What she found even stranger was that she, an ordinary maid, was now being treated like a noble guest. Soon His Highness arrived, appearing with several pets and giving her a sweet smile. Sienna told him he looked a bit strange, but Rashid explained he was just taking a walk with his lovely little companions. He also admitted that was why he was late, and now he would properly welcome his guest. Then the emperor stood up, bowed slightly, and thanked her for coming to his palace. But the girl told him to get straight to the point and not to hesitate to ask her for payment for the services he provided. Sienna explained that the princess was waiting for her, and then the emperor decided to get down to business and explain what he needed. Then Rashid smiled and added that he really wanted to treat the maid to some dessert and handed her a piece. The girl was surprised that was all he wanted, but let him put the piece in her mouth, and it tasted wonderful. The crown prince explained that the dessert was made with top-quality ingredients and had a wonderful fruity aroma. Sienna thought there must be a highly skilled chef in the palace, but Rashid confessed that he had made it all himself. This almost made the maid choke, and the emperor thought she hated it, but she explained she was just too surprised. Then His Highness admitted he enjoyed cooking, and it was also a way for him to spend time with Sienna. Just then, the girl couldn't believe this was the supposedly cold and ruthless crown prince. His Majesty also confessed that he had a particular fondness for cute little animals, because just looking at them made him happy. And as Sienna watched His Highness at that moment, she remembered a story and decided to share it with the crown prince. She told him a story about a princess from the Winter Kingdom who, despite her high status, despised the cold. This princess couldn't even leave her bedroom, where the fireplace burned brightly, until a bird flew to her and took pity on her. The bird wanted to cut off a piece of the sun to give to the princess, and soon the girl received this gift. That lucky ray of sunshine finally helped the princess find her way out of the room. The emperor couldn't believe it was true, but the maid swore it was. Sienna also admitted the story came from her hometown and then asked the crown prince where he had heard it. His Majesty confessed that someone had told it to him as a child, but unfortunately, he couldn't remember who. Rashid thought this was the only clue, but he eventually realized he was wrong. On her way home, Sienna still couldn't figure out where the crown prince had heard that story, as she had made it up as a child. Moreover, she had only told it to one person, and she couldn't believe that person was the crown prince. Sometime after that, the girl met her friend Choo Choo again and thanked her for sending her friends. Sienna explained that she had saved a whole hour because of it, and she also noticed that Choo Choo had become an official maid. She thought she was just lucky, but she understood she was a rather capable employee. While the other maids were busy explaining what her triceps were for, she was invited to Princess Grace's palace. This princess was a member of the royal family, so Choo Choo felt like a country bumpkin and was a bit overwhelmed. Then she remembered the promotion exam was also coming up and realized Sienna didn't even know. From her friend's expression, Choo Choo felt she didn't want to take it, but the maid explained she had only been appointed for a year. Just then, her friend started insisting that she didn't know anyone more competent than Sienna and was sure she would pass with ease. Choo Choo also added that it had opened her eyes and that passing the exam would give her more power and a raise. Sienna realized then that she and her friend could eat whatever they wanted, but what really excited the girl was being able to buy great gifts for the princess. Aerys. Sienna even imagined quitting her job as a maid after that and opening her own little shop. The girl agreed, although she didn't know how it would turn out. When she went to take the exam, she found her name wasn't on the list. The twins explained to Sienna that it was because she was a foreigner and people like them couldn't be recognized as intermediate maids even with high skills and extensive experience. She and several others were still skipped for promotion. This would make their days very difficult. They were already exhausted, and their pay was low. When Princess Aerys found out they had failed the exam over such nonsense, she was furious and vowed to fight the decision. But Sienna begged her not to, saying the matter was already settled. But the little firecracker refused to back down. The maid continued to persuade her, adding that Aerys shouldn't mention it to her grandmother, as it could seriously backfire on her. The girl began to plead with the princess not to worry so much about her, saying she would have another chance someday. But soon, that chance came, only she had failed the exam for being too skilled. Nevertheless, the examiner gave her an offer. If everything went well, she would put in a good word with the Empress Dowager, and then the teacher could promote Sienna to an intermediate maid. The Empress was flawless, especially compared to the Emperor's 4 concubines. Any one of those girls could become the Empress, and now one of them was asking for Sienna's help. The girl knew it was a request she couldn't refuse, and just then, the youngest wife, Angela, came out. The lady looked much younger and more naive than the maid had expected, and she immediately greeted her guest. Sienna didn't waste any time either. She bowed politely and said it was a pleasure to meet her. Angela learned the maid was 18 and praised her for her excellent etiquette despite her short time on the job. She also noticed that Sienna was as humble as the rumors said, admitting she was curious because she worked under Princess Aerys, and then she added that Sienna was turning an abandoned person into a perfect princess. Angela had the maid follow her and demanded that everything she was about to see must be kept a secret forever. In the room, a little boy was playing with a robot, and the lady explained that this was her son. His name was Lacy. She then asked the maid to start training him, but she didn't expect him to become another heiress. Afterwards, Angela asked Sienna to consider her offer and give her an answer, and the girl agreed. She also noticed that the child was different, but there wasn't a single word in the records about Angela's son. She brought it up with His Majesty, hoping he had heard something about the boy. Sienna also added that he was the 4th prince, Lacy, and was 12 years old. Because his father was not interested in his own child, he had been living outside the palace, and there wasn't much information about him. The boy lived at Marquis Wilhelm's estate for his education, and there were also rumors that the Empress was involved in some kind of scandal. The Emperor thought the child had some problem they wanted to hide, so they didn't let him see him. In any case, Angela didn't let anyone see her son. No one in the palace had seen him since he was born. Despite this, the lady still intended to formally introduce Lacy to the imperial palace. When he turned 12, Rashid realized that if even the maid was asking questions, there must be something wrong with the child. He admitted that he was actually excited because he thought she had only come to see him. Sienna wanted to ask His Majesty another question, but he reiterated that she didn't need to worry about the fourth prince. The maid then stated that she still needed to think about it, because the boy needed her help regardless. She got some information from Rashid and wondered how she could repay him. He explained that Sienna had already repaid him, then added that Princess Aerys would be worried. Later, the maid told the little girl that she had received an offer to tutor the prince, but Aerys immediately flew into a rage. She declared that she would never allow it and insisted that as her only mistress, she would not let her leave. Sienna then explained that she wanted to become an intermediate maid, so she had to take this opportunity. Lady Angela could break down barriers that she couldn't do to her social status. Most importantly, the maid was worried that she would attract rumors if she became a third-class servant, so Aerys decided to give her half a day off. The child admitted that she didn't want Sienna to do it, but she also didn't want to take away her chance to try. The maid thanked the princess, knowing that she would be able to do much more in the future than she could now. Just then, the twins went to Aerys and promised not to let her get bored, but she wasn't interested in the idea. But what calmed the little one down was knowing that Sienna would continue to look after her until she became an intermediate maid. The servant understood that even if she wasn't good at it, she would do everything she could to help the Empress. Angela was ecstatic and she agreed, but she also knew Sienna might be taken aback by this sudden request. The girl couldn't even believe her mistress would thank a maid and then ask her to finalize all the details. Sienna explained that the lessons would be 5 hours a day until the boy's birthday. If the results were good during this period, her mistress would promote her to an intermediate maid. Angela was a little surprised because she thought the witch would want jewels, but it was clear that she was much greedier than that. The girl explained that her greed was proportional to the help she would provide. To get the best results, the maid then asked how long the prince had been in this condition. The Empress decided to tell her everything from the beginning. As soon as the boy was born, the Emperor was ecstatic, praising his wife for a job well done. After that, he announced that Angela would become the Empress and Marquis Wilhelm would be more powerful than ever. The Emperor also planned to hand the child over to a wet nurse so his wife could rest for a while. Shortly after, a servant came to her with a worried look, explaining that His Highness had become a little strange. She explained that he never made eye contact and didn't respond to his name, but Angela demanded that they stop calling her son a freak. Angela brought it up with the Emperor, and he allowed her to recuperate outside the castle. He also promised to cure their child no matter what, and his wife suggested he go with her. But His Majesty said that would cause gossip everywhere, and declared that Prince Lacy needed to get well and become sensible. The Emperor also made it clear that the boy could only return to the imperial palace when he became a perfect prince. Years later, Angela unexpectedly saw her father tutoring the boy himself and was terrified. He started yelling at her for daring to come to the estate without permission. Angela believed her father wanted to make Lacy look like a fool at his first banquet so that he could never become emperor. The Marquis also told her that no matter what he did, the prince still understood nothing and refused to act like a normal person. The young lady was very worried but knew she had to find a way out. A few days ago, she came for Lacy. The day had come when she could take her son, but she was not allowed to be called his parent. Her father, the Marquis, promised he would return on Lacy's birthday, and she was afraid he would find out the boy had been here all along. Now Angela hoped for the maid's help, because if her father saw the boy had become smarter, he wouldn't blame her. The situation was much worse than Sienna had imagined. She knew the lady was having a hard time, but now the child was the priority, and she swore to do her best. After signing the contract, she knew she had to work even harder. Then she asked where the prince was. Angela explained that His Highness was super sensitive but only noticed things right in front of him. But the biggest problem was being unable to connect with him. Sienna went up to him, tried to talk to him, said the weather was nice, and held out her hand. But the boy barely reacted, so the maid told the lady that he wasn't sick, he was just born that way. She also explained that since he wasn't sick, there was no cure. Nevertheless, Sienna added that there were ways to improve his condition slightly, and even if it was difficult, she would help the lady. Angela was shocked, but to make her son better, she agreed to anything. The lady was worried because she was used to taking care of her son alone, without a maid, and had never sought help before. Although she had asked Sienna to tutor him, she didn't understand why she only planned to be with the prince for a month. The girl explained that she had spent a long time tutoring a princess, so she would share all the knowledge that could help. And Angela, even while accepting the maid's help, should not give up on her child. A mother is the one who should raise her own child. But she wasn't sure if she could take proper care of him and was also afraid Lacy might not like it. Sienna pleaded with the lady not to give up or lose hope, and that if she didn't give up, she would succeed and achieve great results. Angela assured the maid she would try, but she was still worried, and even deep breaths didn't help much. Then she went to her son's room to see what he was doing, and he was playing with his toys, as usual. The lady noticed the blocks behind him were crooked, and remembering that Lacy hated things not being straight, she decided to align them. But the boy got very angry when someone touched his things, and his mother apologized to him. She knew he had put all his effort into building the little town, but she could see he was still bored to death. Angela tried to treat him with some delicious food, but the child hated sweets and didn't like long talks. Lacy didn't even like listening to music. Loud noises would irritate him. Then it suddenly occurred to her that he used to like drawing. The lady thought children should do what they enjoy, and she hoped this trick would finally work. She also remembered that when she felt lonely and cried nonstop, drawing was the only thing that could calm her down. Even though she wasn't good at it, she found it fun. Now she noticed that Lacy was engrossed in it too. Shortly after, the boy spent some time with a paintbrush in hand and produced an amazing painting. Angela was stunned, thinking he was not just a genius, but a once-in-a-century prodigy with a talent most people could only dream of. She still couldn't believe that a child who had never learned these things could draw something so incredible. Moreover, the boy was completely focused on his work and wasn't distracted by anything for half the day. Although it wasn't for long, Lacy didn't even glance at his mom. Then Sienna explained to her that if the boy hated her, he would have run away in fear long ago. But he didn't, which meant the prince felt comfortable around her. But suddenly, Angela saw her son smash the easel, and she was terrified. But the maid explained that it was his way of expressing frustration. Sienna told her to look closely at the boy and pointed out that he wasn't trying to hurt himself or anyone. Lacy was just frustrated, and the maid suggested she go and hug him. Angela agreed, believing that even if the prince didn't understand her, he could feel her warmth and know she was on his side. Then she embraced the boy, showing him her affection, and in those hugs, he understood that she was his mom. Afterwards, Angela admitted she had no idea that hugging and comforting him would calm him down so quickly and make him so affectionate. She confessed that she really didn't know her son. That day, the boy fell asleep early, exhausted. Angela thanked the maid and let her leave, and the maid promised to come again tomorrow. Back at the Imperial Palace, Sienna learned that the princess was going on a picnic with the twins. Aerys also noticed the maid was tired and promised to wait until she was off work tomorrow before bothering her. The girl watched them leave happily, and the little girl was very happy. Then she ran into His Majesty again. Rashid was about to confess that he just missed her, but Sul corrected him, saying they were here for the tea that had arrived a few days ago. He didn't argue with his old friend. Then Sienna offered to make them tea, and the prince had a guard take his pet for a walk. Saul understood His Majesty's hint and didn't argue. The prince then asked how Lacy's training was going. Rashid admitted he was just curious if the maid could do in 2 weeks what the marquee couldn't do in 5 years. He explained that the child couldn't maintain eye contact and that he'd heard he liked to scream like a madman. Sienna explained that His Highness wasn't very stable yet, but he was getting better and would soon be able to bless everyone with his smile. Rashid still didn't understand why she was so sure about it, and the maid explained that she had seen it before. The girl confessed that her stepmother's son, her younger brother, was very similar to the prince, although his condition was worse. He couldn't understand what was said to him and had no talent, just like the prince. They even considered sending him to a monastery at first, but then his condition improved, all thanks to his mother's deep and sincere love. She believed that by her side, her son would thrive and be happier than anywhere else. Now Sienna's brother was no longer around. She admitted that he had also cruelly tormented her, and the other maids. That's why the girl decided to tell His Majesty everything, and she also confessed that she felt nothing about her family's death, regardless. For her, what was more important now was that the prince's condition was improving every day. Sienna also believed that at this rate, he would be able to behave properly by his birthday. Shortly after, Angela explained to her son that he should repeat after her, and if he succeeded, she would kiss him and give him new paints. Soon, the child was able to repeat that he was the fourth prince, Lacy, and thank everyone for coming to his birthday. Angela was super happy that her son did it perfectly and gushed about how smart he was. Sienna saw the results and admitted that the lady had done an excellent job and that Lacy had also put in a great deal of effort. The maid then explained to Angela that this was as far as they would go for now, but Angela protested that the party was in 3 days. Sienna also explained that Prince Lacy was who he was. That was the real him, but he was too young and sensitive, and his mother was too weak to fight against all those people. So Sienna decided to give her a piece of advice. The girl explained that the banquet to celebrate the prince's birthday should be postponed for another year. But Angela was worried that if Lacy wasn't introduced this time, he might lose his title. Just then, a panicked maid ran into the room and announced that Marquis Wilhelm had arrived. The lady was terrified, while Wilhelm was already trying to force his way in, yelling at them not to stop him. The maids told him that permission was needed to enter the Empress's palace, but he pushed them aside without so much as a greeting. He went to his daughter, announced he had urgent business, and then asked where the prince was. Angela immediately began to explain that Lacy was lonely at the estate, so she couldn't leave him alone. She then brought him to the imperial palace and began tutoring him with the help of a talented maid. They had managed to improve his condition, and Angela hoped her father would appreciate it. But he also suggested postponing the banquet. He even added that if that trick didn't work, they could just announce that the prince had died in an accident. Nevertheless, he couldn't do that to his own grandson, and he was glad he didn't have to worry about that problem anymore. The Marquis then told his daughter not to worry because he knew how to help Lacy. Now he explained that through magic, someone could control the prince for the entire duration of the banquet, and they could fool the guests. The Marquis also explained that they had no other choice, as this was the only way to meet expectations. He assured his daughter it was just a temporary measure for the banquet, after which he would personally return to train the child. Now the Marquis was sure he could protect not only the family's honor, but Lacy's as well. Angela pleaded with her father not to do it, saying it was no longer necessary, and she didn't want to do such a terrible thing to her son. But he yelled that she needed to face reality, saying he didn't want to resort to this either. Then, the Marquis entered the room and saw the boy peacefully drawing some pictures. But the grandfather was determined to take him, and he didn't stop even when his daughter fell to her knees and begged him. Angela was terrified of what would happen to her son, but her father just pushed her aside. He then grabbed the little prince, who, terrified, began to call for his mom to protect him. But the lady couldn't defy her father. She had always played the part of the obedient daughter, a role she couldn't even remember now. She had to be the perfect lady to survive, and she wasn't allowed to make a sound as they tightened her corset for her. Then she suddenly understood. She remembered how excited her father was when he found her the perfect match, the Emperor's fourth wife. But the truth was, Angela was just scared to death, silently praying for someone to save her. Now she knew she had to at least protect her child, and she immediately lunged at her father, demanding he let go of her son. She told him he wouldn't dare take him and declare that from now on, the prince would stay with her, and it was not up for discussion. The Marquis thought his daughter was acting like a damn empress and realized he had been too nice to her. He then explained that even if she wore a crown, she was still his daughter, and that hadn't changed. The Marquis was angry that while he was trying to protect his family, Angela decided to start a rebellion. He slapped her, but then soldiers swarmed in, yelling at him for daring to lay a hand on a member of the imperial family. Sienna rushed to Angela's side to comfort her, explaining that these men were just trying to get her father out. On the spot, she decided to order the soldiers to throw the man in prison, effective immediately. Even while locked in the dungeon, the Marquis was still screaming at the guards, claiming his daughter was the empress of this country. He also yelled that the soldiers, his daughter, and that annoying little maid would pay for bringing him such humiliation. Just then, he noticed the maid approaching him, but he told her not to even think about begging for forgiveness. But Sienna explained that she wasn't here to ask for forgiveness, but to deliver a message from her mistress. The girl remembered explaining to Angela that she had already prepared the guards because she noticed the Marquis was in a bad mood. Then, when she heard the man threatening his own own daughter and the prince, she would run over immediately. Since the maid witnessed the whole thing, the marquis was caught red-handed and thrown in prison. Angela then declared that she would no longer let her father manipulate her or her son. Then, she asked Sienna to tell him that he'd better not show his face in the imperial palace again unless she allowed it. Angela also wanted him to know that she would be raising Lacy from now on. But the marquis was just furious that his daughter sent a servant to tell him all this. He started demanding they bring Angela here, but Sienna pointed out that not only was she the empress, she was the prince's mother. His insulting her was basically a slap in the emperor's face. So the marquis was now considered a traitor. If he didn't want to be labeled a traitor, he had better accept Her Majesty's proposal, as it might be his last chance. The marquis decided to agree, knowing there would be rumors that he couldn't control his own daughter, but he needed to get out of here first. The girl then handed him a document proving he agreed to all the terms. But the marquis just became even more furious. He still believed Angela was weak and foolish and didn't have the guts to do something like this to her own father. The marquis guessed someone had put her up to it, then realized it was the maid and was convinced his daughter couldn't do anything without her. Moreover, he was very curious to see how the banquet would go and how they planned to introduce Prince Lacy to the public. Wilhelm claimed that without his help, they would just mess everything up and then they would regret it. Nevertheless, he signed the document and then left. Sienna reported this to Angela, who praised the maid for it. But now they had to worry about the prince's banquet, and the lady said she could just cancel it altogether. She figured all she'd have to deal with then were some eye rolls from people and her father's anger. And that was that. As soon as the banquet was canceled, rumors began to fly that the little prince was crazy and couldn't be seen in public. People also said he was cursed by some evil witch and even thought Angela was going to abandon him. The noble ladies kept telling her that the more she delayed her explanation, the harder it would be to get rid of him later. They didn't know how to help her with the prince and just kept asking questions, insisting that everything would be fine afterwards. But Angela pleaded with them to at least be polite, even if her child was different. She explained that her son wasn't crazy, just special. Just then, the nobles didn't understand why she had canceled the banquet. The lady explained that she intended to introduce Lacy to the world outside the palace when he was ready. But the noble ladies told her she was shirking her responsibilities and that the prince would not be able to inherit the throne. Even knowing all the risks, Angela still intended to do it because she wanted her son to have a happy life. Her friends understood completely and promised to take care of everything else, so she thanked them. No matter what condition Lacy was in, no one would dare laugh at the bloodline of a noble emperor. This solved the rumor problem, but people still whispered behind their backs. The nobles began to gossip that Angela would be in big trouble if His Majesty returned and found out about this. Sienna assured His Majesty this wouldn't happen, explaining that in that case, the rumors would have already reached the emperor. She added that if he hadn't returned yet, there was no need to worry so much. Besides, her financial situation hadn't changed, which meant her family still supported her, and the rumors would soon die down as usual. Now, Angela realized she had dragged Sienna into her mess, and out of gratitude, she announced that she would fulfill her promise. After thanking Her Majesty, the maid returned to the Ruby Palace, and Princess Aerys immediately threw herself into her arms. The little girl said she missed her like crazy and swore never to let her go again. The child also confessed that she had been studying while she was away, but then asked if they could go on a picnic together. Aerys had dressed up for the occasion and looked so beautiful that Sienna began to worry someone might snatch her away. They chose a secluded spot in the imperial palace for their picnic, which was quiet and super cozy. The handmaidens were thrilled that the princess could finally leave the palace, and the princess herself was overjoyed. The handmaidens even played with her by acting as different fairy tale characters to amuse her. While she was happily hopping and playing on the grass, Aerys noticed a boy drawing and went over to ask what he was painting. Meanwhile, in Rashid's palace, he was asking a guard when his father would return and learned that he still needed more time to recover. The prince had been handling state affairs for nearly 6 months, and he knew this was too long for a simple recovery. Sol also explained that the emperor had been suffering from constant headaches, and his condition was worsening daily. The guards assured him they would have good news soon, so Rashid suggested they take a walk outside. During their walk, he ran into the group from the Ruby Palace, but Aerys, being her usual self, just assumed her brother was stalking them. Then, His Majesty also spotted Angela, which took him by surprise. The lady explained that she had just come out for a short walk with her son and happened to run into Princess Aerys. Rashid noticed Lacy's stare, thinking the boy was about to lose his head. But Angela explained that the child had not yet fully mastered all the etiquette and asked for his forgiveness. Rashid still didn't understand why he was being stared at like that, and the boy's mother explained that he just wanted to draw his relatives. The lady added that Lacy wanted to draw anything beautiful he saw and again asked him not to be angry. At this point, Aerys chimed in and began insisting that her little brother's drawings were super beautiful. Then, the girl recalled the first time they met, and Angela started explaining to the children who was who. Her Majesty the Empress was also very excited to see Sienna again, and Sienna explained that they were just out for a picnic. Angela then thanked the little princess for letting them spend some time with Sienna, saying she had been a great help. Afterward, the Empress promoted the twin handmaidens to the middle rank, believing it would be good for everyone. Nini and Nana didn't know how to thank her, but she told them to thank their friend instead. So they began begging Sienna to let them do something for her as a token of their gratitude. But Sienna was just happy that they had taken good care of Aerys. They were still incredibly grateful, because if it weren't for her, they would still be exploited, working like beasts of burden for a pitiful salary. Just then, the little princess noticed Lacy was drawing, and he was very good at it. The child confessed that he only wanted to draw beautiful things, and Aerys then asked him to draw her. Soon, the painting was finished, and the result was stunning, even seeming to emit the fragrance of roses. The girl kept muttering on the side that the other royals only knew how to curse, while Lacy was a complete genius. The handmaiden Sienna also chimed in, saying His Highness's painting skills were simply divine. So Prince Rashid decided to have the boy paint a portrait of him as well, as he wanted to see his little brother's skills for himself. Sienna noticed that His Majesty seemed to be enjoying the feeling of being a model, but he said he was just joking. Rashid also enjoyed that he could drink fine tea because of his handmaiden, and he then asked her to chat with him. He asked her what was so great about painting, at which point she handed him a quill and told him to give it a try. His Majesty agreed and began to draw a portrait of Sienna, but naturally, he only managed to produce a comical caricature. Rashid admitted this kind of thing wasn't for him, and the handmaiden explained that it's important to know what you're good at. She explained that rather than dragging everything out, it's better to just give up on things you're not good at. Sienna then added that people always fixate on what they don't have, so she thinks it's important to realize that. Immediately, instead of worrying about what you're not good at, it's better to do your best at what you excel in. Rashid suddenly burst out laughing. He finally understood why she had gone from being a princess to a handmaiden. His Majesty realized she was much happier this way and told her he was happy for her. She hadn't expected to hear something like that, even though becoming a middle-rank handmaiden was a big deal for her. For a foreigner from a defeated nation, achieving this was harder than climbing to the heavens. But Sienna had done it, and Rashid was genuinely happy for her. He didn't know that she had gotten the position through some underhanded means, and with the Empress's help, but at that moment, Sienna's heart was pounding. The handmaiden thanked His Majesty for his congratulations, and her smile seemed even sweeter to him. Rashid suddenly felt an impulse to pull her into his arms, and never let go. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, the guard Sul interrupted him, announcing that the young prince's painting was finished. Everyone rushed forward to see the result and was left speechless. His Majesty's portrait was unbelievably beautiful and so lifelike, it seemed he could step out of the painting at any moment. Because Lacy was truly an artist, he had been given a gift to replace the normal life that was stolen from him by a demon. Among the hundreds of paintings he would create, those that would go down in history, this one would be among the masterpieces. Later, Sienna received her new uniform, and Aerys said she looked like a ripe peach among green leaves. The girl herself was also very fond of the uniform. It wasn't tattered like the ones worn by the lower-rank handmaidens. The twins also received the same uniform and were ecstatic. Earlier, the princess had received a letter from her grandmother, who had heard that her handmaidens were leaving for training and invited the little one to her palace, so she wouldn't be lonely and bored. Aerys decided to take this opportunity to hold a banquet every day during her stay at the palace. She would eat whatever she wanted, take whatever she wanted, and in short, drain every last penny from the old lady. It was time for the handmaidens to depart, and Aerys threatened Sienna that when she returned, she would never let her out of her arms. The look she gave her favorite handmaiden at that moment truly delighted the twins. Upon arriving at their destination, the handmaidens noticed the atmosphere was completely different. There were many middle-rank handmaidens there, but a tense feeling hung in the air. Megan came out to greet the newcomers, and immediately warned them in a slightly displeased tone that although they had passed the exam, they had not yet officially earned their status. They would have 3 weeks of training, and if any issues arose with their qualifications, they would be demoted again. The duties of handmaidens were strictly divided, with the lowest ranking ones responsible for cleaning and laundry. They were managed by the middle rank handmaidens to ensure work proceeded smoothly. The top rank handmaidens that basically served their masters directly. Each of them would have an assigned post, yes, but that was just for show, as things could change at any moment. Despite Sienna's experience, she still hoped the local handmaidens would give her a hand. Then OM approached her, reminding her that she was known as the troublemaker from the defeated nation. OM had heard she had connections on the outside, but said that here, only her skills mattered. Starting today, Sienna was in charge of preparing ingredients in the kitchen. She had better be prepared, because the moment she messed up, they would report her immediately. The girl felt that OM just disliked her for no reason, even though she actually enjoyed being with a group of people who had their own system and way of doing things. The handmaiden assigned to work with her just told her to watch and learn on her own. So Sienna walked into the kitchen and greeted everyone as soon as she entered. But all eyes were fixed on her, and it felt like a chill seeping into her bones. The atmosphere was extremely grim, and the handmaidens themselves looked furious, like a pack of demons. Walking further in, Sienna heard a familiar, wicked snicker. She turned around and saw Jean, who looked like she was already plotting something. From her tone, it was clear she wasn't happy about Sienna's arrival. A short while ago, when they told her a new middle-rank handmaiden was coming, Jean couldn't believe it. Moreover, they had also told her to keep an eye on Sienna, because all the lower-rank handmaidens listened to her. Now, Jean was mad with jealousy that Sienna had reached this level almost instantly. She couldn't figure out why Sienna hadn't died in that ruby palace. Then Jean started spreading rumors that Sienna had used some kind of trick to get the position. For example, that they had come together, otherwise it would have been impossible for her to enter the official training phase. That red-haired which spread rumors that Sienna was a fraud and was stubborn as a mule, and that she only got promoted because she backstabbed a friend. Seeing those glares now, Sienna realized Jean had been ruining her reputation all over the place. But this didn't break her. She boldly announced that from now on, she was in charge of these handmaidens, so they had better show her some respect, seeing as they couldn't even be bothered to greet her. Then Sienna gave them a piece of her mind, saying things that would usually intimidate people, while Jean just stood by, grinding her teeth in anger. Then she threw a tantrum, declaring that she wouldn't take orders because this was her territory. There she went again, saying Sienna's position wasn't earned on merit, so Jean wouldn't let anyone listen to her. She even added that taking care of the princess was useless, and that everyone here thought Sienna was a good-for-nothing. Just then, the redhead received a well-deserved slap across her arrogant face. Sienna announced in a calm tone that if they didn't cooperate, everyone would be fired. She also didn't deny that getting her middle rank handmaiden position wasn't entirely fair. She got the spot because of a recommendation from someone important up top. Sienna threatened that she would tell that person they weren't listening to her, which would cause trouble for them. Because when she was asked why the handmaidens were being disobedient, she would say it was because they didn't take her seriously just because she was recommended by that person. In that case, life wouldn't be easy for any of the lower rank handmaidens. The girls were terrified they would be severely disciplined, so they bowed their heads and greeted Sienna. But Jean was still grumbling, not believing her backer was anyone from the royal family. These words started to annoy Sienna, and she shot a death glare at that red-haired jerk. That look, the kind that sent shivers down your spine, did creep Jean out, but she still threatened to report Sienna. In the exact same way, she slammed the door and stormed off. And Sienna was just glad she didn't have to keep making excuses or fabricating stories, since she had already made a decent impression on the others anyway. Now she could finally get to work, and she began asking the handmaidens what food the kitchen had received and in what quantities. The rest of the day passed just like that, without any further issues. Sienna was checking the supplies, not just the quantity but also the expiration dates. Because of this, everyone was stuck there until dawn, their arms about to fall off. There was still a huge pile of work left, but Sienna suggested everyone take a break and have something to eat. The food looked simple, but the handmaidens were so tired that it tasted incredibly delicious. This was the food left over after the middle-rank handmaidens had eaten their fill. Sienna also knew the others would be uncomfortable eating with her around, so she planned to sit off to the side. Afterward, the girls started talking about how Sienna was a pretty good worker and that things would be well organized under her. They even hoped to work with her in the palace after the training was over, and Jean happened to overhear this. Rage filled her heart once more, and she wouldn't rest until she saw Sienna kneeling at her feet, begging for mercy. Then she yelled at the others, painting Sienna as worthless and reminding them how she had threatened them not long ago. Jean was shocked to hear the other handmaidens now speaking highly of their supervisor. She'd had enough of this talk and stormed out of the kitchen, muttering curses at Sienna. It angered her that these handmaidens had already forgotten who was feeding them, so she swore that as long as she was around, she would never let Sienna become a middle-rank handmaiden. She even considered burning the whole place down, but realized that would be going too far. So she decided to tarnish Sienna's reputation again and set off to find the handmaiden OM. A week had passed since then, and Sienna was feeling exhausted and sleep-deprived. She was forced to work late, and out of nowhere, everyone started nitpicking everything she did. Sienna was blamed for sharing leftover food with the handmaidens, as if it would spoil or something. But in her opinion, what was the big deal? But OM started yelling that if they did that, the handmaidens would lose all respect for the middle-rank staff. Sienna kept arguing that their work efficiency had actually improved. They were even getting better reviews from the other kitchens now. But those excuses didn't work, and OM continued to scold her harshly, finding fault with every little thing. Sienna wasn't really angry. She knew this was just part of the job, and she was ready to handle whatever came her way. The next day, when she arrived at the warehouse, she saw the handmaidens had come in way too early. They had a massive amount of work, but luckily, they had already prepared some things the night before. Also, the new system meant they would never again mix up which ingredients went to which kitchen. But when they walked into the kitchen, everyone was horrified. The place had been turned into a total mess. Sienna was the most shocked, but she knew exactly who was behind this. On top of that, there was a rat strutting around, eating the spilled food as if it owned the place. The three of them had to work like crazy to put everything back in order, and by the time they were done, they could barely stand. OM came in furious, wanting to know what on earth was going on. Why was it so noisy? Jean was right behind her, making sarcastic remarks about how poorly the place was managed and saying that's why they had a rat problem. OM suggested that Sienna, who was so confident yesterday, should explain. After all, she had said there was nothing to worry about, but now it seemed things weren't so great. Huh? Then she reminded her that this is what happens when you go easy on the lower-rank handmaidens. Jean was enjoying the show, thinking Sienna would start begging OM not to demote her. But then she suddenly admitted the mess was her responsibility, but said she needed to take care of something else before accepting her punishment. A lot of ingredients were ruined, and they had to prepare breakfast soon, so there could be problems. And rats spread germs and diseases, which increased the risk of a plague outbreak. So even the ingredients we thought were safe and locked in the cabinets could be completely ruined. Sienna didn't want to get into all that trouble, but she asked for a chance to make up for it and promised she would make sure all the food supplies arrived on time. Meanwhile, Rashid was still half asleep, snoozing in his bed, when Sul came in to tell him he had a visitor. His Majesty frowned, but when he heard it was Miss Sienna, he immediately leaped out of bed. He had no idea why she was here so early, especially since she was supposed to be in training. He guessed she might have gotten into a fight with someone, or maybe someone had attacked her. Sienna was probably standing at his door in tears right now, in need of his comfort. As it turned out, the girl was quite calm, and the first thing she did was apologize for bothering me so early. But Rashid's adrenaline was still pumping, so he told her to get on with it and say what had happened. Sienna told him that rats had gotten into the warehouse and ruined all the food. Rashid, of course, wasn't worried, but he was still thrilled that the girl had come to him for help. As he invited her in, Sienna asked him for some food from his palace. He found it a rather bold request, but he wasn't angry at all. He just wondered how she planned to pay him back, since she would need a large amount given the circumstances. Sienna bowed her head and promised to pay it all back, hoping to save enough money within a few years. Rashid was silent, and the girl looked up, vowing to settle the debt with him. His Majesty was a bit confused, as if he would have helped her anyway if she had just asked. He then started asking if she was being mistreated at work, and Sienna assured him there were no problems on that front. Rashid then told her to take whatever she needed, adding that he he wouldn't charge her for it. The girl was surprised. He probably wanted something else, but he hadn't named his price yet. He just explained that when he figured it out, he would find Sienna and tell her what he wanted. Soon, Sienna arrived at the food warehouse and started ordering everyone to unload everything. The handmaidens quickly got to work, while Jean looked on, confused as to where she had gotten so much stuff. She even started to think Sienna was a witch. Then she started inspecting the products, but they immediately urged her to help with the work. The redhead was left speechless and had to pick up a box that seemed impossibly heavy for her. By the time the unloading was finished, all the handmaidens collapsed into their chairs, exhausted. They were thrilled to have finished on time and thanked Sienna for making it all happen. She returned the compliment, praising the handmaidens for their hard work. Then the girls curiously asked her where she got all the supplies, and Sienna just smiled smugly. She then admitted that a nobleman had helped her. The handmaidens figured the person must have their own warehouse to get things so quickly. Now, they were convinced Sienna had a high-ranking sponsor, and even Jean was starting to believe it. It angered her that Sienna was ahead of her not only in rank, but also in the royal family's favor. It was obvious this nobleman had real feelings for her, but then Jean started to fear that Sienna might report her, so she decided to keep her mouth shut. Just then, Sienna's voice came from behind her, wondering if the redhead was involved. Jean completely lost it, screaming that she had gone to bed early yesterday and hadn't gone near the warehouse. This just gave her away, because Sienna hadn't mentioned the warehouse at all. And Jean had announced there were rats in the warehouse as soon as she came in this morning. So it all made sense. Yesterday, OM had scolded Sienna to distract everyone while Jean pulled her dirty trick. To be honest, the look on Jean's face when she walked in this morning said it all. But she still insisted it was just suspicion and swore she had no reason to do such a thing. Sienna didn't want to argue much, just saying there would be an investigation, and they would soon find out who had the warehouse key yesterday. Besides, this palace was full of eyes and ears, and it wouldn't take long to find out who smuggled the rats into the warehouse. Jean turned pale with anxiety, but still tried to defend herself. When the palace heard about something like this, they wouldn't waste time finding out the truth. They would just kick everyone out. Jean was betting that Sienna wouldn't report it, since she was responsible for the other handmaidens. Sienna gave the redhead a grim look, and then told her she could see right through her. She reminded her that she had someone important backing her, and he wouldn't let her get dragged down. So only Jean would pay for this mess, because she had almost harmed the royal family. In a fit of rage, Jean yelled that she was only trying to mess with Sienna. But her words sounded more like a confession. Realizing this, she fell to her knees and begged Sienna not to fire her, finally admitting she was wrong. But Sienna told her that if she truly wanted forgiveness, she would have to tell the whole truth. Sienna leaned in a little closer and asked her who else was behind this whole thing. The redhead confessed that she had OM distract Sienna while she went to release the rats. Just then, the handmaiden OM burst in, screaming that it was all nonsense and she had nothing to do with it. Despite this, she pleaded with them to keep it a secret, even promising to apologize to Sienna. But Sienna just started playing mind games, saying her backer was very worried about the whole thing and even suspected she was being bullied. Now she pretended not to know what to do, as if she couldn't lie to her backer. Knowing the fate they might face, Jean and OM began to sincerely beg her for forgiveness. Then Sienna suggested they just pretend nothing had happened, so the mysterious man wouldn't have to worry. And the food she brought was enough for the entire palace, but it had cost a fortune. Since Jean and OM were responsible for the incident, they would have to bear the consequences for it. Just as Sienna wished, the guilty handmaidens were severely punished for conspiring with a lower-rank handmaiden and engaging in bribery. The handmaiden OM was demoted to the lowest rank, and Jean, the cunning troublemaker, was demoted to an intern. It was the ultimate humiliation. Most importantly, she would also have to compensate for all the ruined food, and as for the diligent maids, they would later receive a bonus. Prince Rashid summoned Sienna, praising her for her excellent skills, but after taking a closer look at her, he noticed that she seemed to be troubled by something. Although she tried to act distant, she still asked His Highness how he could tell, feeling as if he could read people's minds. Rashid admitted he didn't have that ability, but he was very good at taking care of the weak. Just then, he held out his hand, and a small bird landed on it, and Sienna realized he was treating her like a pet. Then, Rashid promised that if she wanted to talk about what happened, he was always ready to listen. Sienna thanked him for his help, but she was very worried about Jane, who had cried so heartbrokenly for the first time ever. Her lifelong dream had been to become a top maid, and now she was so devastated she couldn't say a word. Now, Sienna felt guilty for ruining the maid's dream, but she didn't regret punishing her, as it was necessary to prevent similar incidents from happening again. Because if someone makes a mistake and goes unpunished, they will never learn to regret it. The prince suddenly remembered her murderous expression from that time, but he quite liked it. He even leaned in towards Sienna and gently touched her cheek. Rashid realized that this girl could be very tough when necessary. Sienna even blushed and thanked him softly, feeling a bit awkward and surprised at the same time. She noticed the strange look Rashid gave her in that moment. He then confessed that he liked her personality, otherwise, she would have a hard time later on. To steer Rashid away from the topic, Sienna asked him what he wanted in exchange for the food. She had hoped he would just ask for a cup of tea as usual, but Rashid suddenly asked her out on a date. Hearing this bombshell, Sienna was speechless, thinking he was just teasing her. Rashid realized he had been too direct and explained that he had business outside the palace and wanted to take Sienna with him. And the reason was even stranger. The guy explained that he was afraid to go alone. The girl started trying to talk him out of it, as she didn't have permission to leave the palace. But Rashid told her not to worry and assured her there would be no problems. Sienna knew in her heart that no one dared to defy the crown prince, but she still couldn't believe they were going on a date. When they arrived at their destination, Rashid was about to get out of the carriage. But Sienna stopped him with a friendly reminder. You are the crown prince and shouldn't be wandering around alone without guards. You might run into assassins, and then we'd be in big trouble. She also pointed out his attire, saying that a prince dressed like that was too conspicuous. She explained that she was just a maid, and it was her job to worry. So Rashid agreed to disguise himself as a commoner, so they wouldn't need guards. They headed to the market, which was filled with all sorts of fruits and vegetables. Rashid admitted it was his first time at a market. He had spent almost his entire childhood confined in the palace, and was sent to the battlefield after growing up. He and Sienna had only been back at the palace for a few months. The girl suddenly realized that although she had always thought they were completely different, they actually had something in common. She was so lost in thought that she didn't catch his last words. Rashid repeated himself, saying he was talking about the festival being held today. They paused by a fountain to admire the view. Then, Sienna's stomach started to growl, and Rashid, realizing she was hungry, suggested they get something to eat. The girl agreed, but asked if they could go to the place with the most refreshing beer in the entire empire. Rashid was a bit surprised that Sienna liked beer, but hey, she was an adult after all. Besides, according to the maids, beer helps you relax and forget your troubles after a hard day's work. Of course, Sienna had never actually had beer before, and after just one sip, she started complaining that she'd been tricked. But the alcohol started to take effect, and the girl asked for another glass. Rashid was worried she would get drunk quickly, but when she confessed that she suddenly felt very hot, he knew she was already drunk. He didn't drink, saying he had to take her home later. They stayed for a while longer, and the way back turned out to be much more interesting than expected. Sienna was hiccuping from time to time, insisting she wasn't Rashid's pet and asking if he thought she was cute. Then she started pinching his cheeks herself, saying he was just as cute as she was. Then, with courage from who knows where, though why wouldn't she have it? Sienna leaned in and kissed Rashid on the nose because she just couldn't resist. He was so handsome. For the first time ever, the guy was completely flustered and speechless. And she, noticing his awkward expression, confessed that her heart fluttered every time he looked at her like that. And now, she wanted to make him feel the same way. The next morning, Sienna woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside her window, and sunlight was already illuminating her room. The girl woke up, realized it was late, and panicked about oversleeping. She hurriedly got herself ready and showed up at the warehouse, apologizing for being late as soon as she entered. But she noticed the maids weren't doing much of anything, and they explained that everyone had the day off. Some temporarily assigned maids were working in place of her team. They were also told to rest well today because they were always swamped and needed to recharge. What shocked Sienna even more was that this was a direct order from the crown prince. The maids used to find him terrifying, but now they believed he was the best ruler. He even sent them food, and although it was just soup for Sienna, It was the perfect hangover cure. Realizing Rashid had done all this for her, the girl felt guilty but started gulping down the soup anyway. The soup was still warm, and her stomach immediately felt wonderfully soothed. Sienna had just taken a few sips when she heard a familiar voice from behind her. Jane walked in and softly confessed that she could resume her lessons the next day. Sienna didn't know what to think, as if she were now the culprit. For a moment, Jane just stood there silently, like a child caught doing something wrong. Then she admitted that she felt extremely guilty about what she had done to Sienna and sincerely apologized. She also said she didn't want to lie to her anymore because it was too agonizing for her. Sienna calmly explained that lies are like an avalanche that will eventually crush the liar. However, she was glad that Jane had decided to take responsibility for her actions. The red-haired girl couldn't say anything at that moment except to express her gratitude. Sienna spent most of the rest of the day resting in bed and felt refreshed by evening. The feeling of a hangover lingered, as she had indeed drunk too much the previous night. But then she remembered she had touched the crown prince's cheek, and she started cursing herself internally. It felt like pulling on a ball of clay at the time. Sienna was mortified, and while she was still blaming herself, the other maids told her to keep it down, meaning she would try to explain later like I was just acting on a whim, and it was my first time drinking beer, but deep down she knew Rashid let her off because he found her cute. This made her even angrier that he was treating her like a little pet. So she vowed to apologize for acting like a complete fool. She decided to go see him after her shift the next day. Meanwhile, His Highness had been in bed for a long time, but just couldn't fall asleep. He couldn't shake the memory of Sienna's kiss and couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she showed up. Rashid once again found himself looking forward to seeing the girl. Meanwhile, a maid was walking down the warehouse corridor holding a candle. She entered one of the rooms and noticed food scattered everywhere. The next day, Sienna went to see His Highness again to apologize for what had happened, clarifying that she was apologizing for her inappropriate behavior. The girl clearly remembered pinching his cheek, and she must have pinched it hard since she was always kneading dough in the warehouse. It was completely unintentional, but the prince was curious about what else she remembered. It turned out her memory of that night ended there. Rashid started hinting that something even stranger had happened, and Sienna was terrified, thinking she might have hit him. Realizing the maid wasn't getting it, His Highness decided to give her a hint. He leaned down and booped her on the nose, just as she had done to him. He then explained that it had been completely unexpected, but told her not to apologize because he liked it. Afterwards, he took her hand, placed it on his cheek, and gave her a sweet smile, flashing that puppy dog look again. Sienna was so mortified that she turned bright red and swore never to drink again. Later, when she returned to the warehouse, she was told that supplies were disappearing rapidly. The supply request from Princess Grace's palace had skyrocketed, as if she had hired a whole new batch of maids, but the number of servants was the same as usual, which meant someone was stealing food. Sienna headed there to sort things out and met their head maid, who had also noticed something strange. Food had been disappearing from their palace as well. Even the desserts we prepared for guests have vanished without a trace. There might be a thief among the maids, although with the tight security, it's hard to get through undetected. They even started hiding the supplies, but they were still disappearing. The situation was serious, and Sienna decided to find the culprit as soon as possible. The maid suspected a servant who had started working there 3 months ago. She was as tall as a giant, as strong as a bear, and as powerful as an ox, basically a monster. This description best fit Choo-Choo, and Sienna couldn't believe her best friend would do such a thing. Choo-Choo did eat a lot, but she would never do something like this. They met later, and Sienna told her friend she was suspected of stealing food. She immediately blew up, claiming she hadn't done anything of the sort. She then asked Sienna if she knew who the real thief was, but she didn't have any leads yet. However, she was in charge of food management, so it was her job to find the culprit. Even if she found the thief, she didn't plan to make a big deal out of it. She just wanted them to promise not to do it again. Choo-Choo decided to tell her from the beginning how she came to this palace. She was summoned to work for Princess Grace, who was known for being a super elegant lady. Choo-Choo was surprised why someone like her was sent there. And what's more, they made her a full-fledged maid. The emperor's third daughter was famous for her beauty, and he had 7 daughters in total. The maid's job was to serve the princess and help her maintain her flawless beauty. Every morning, they would apply the finest lotion prepared the day before to her face and comb her long hair for up to an hour. Grace would take a milk bath every night and receive a lavender oil massage before bed. Choo-Choo's job was to ensure the princess's delicate skin didn't get even a little bit tanned. This meant carrying a parasol for her whenever she went outside. The rest of the time, Choo-Choo would do other odd jobs, like cleaning the garden paths. One day, she overheard people saying Grace might be sick because she wasn't eating much. Then came the news of the missing food, and even the jerky they made for snacks was gone. They decided not to make a fuss since the princess didn't eat much anyway. But they couldn't let the thief get away with it, and Choo-Choo couldn't let anyone harm her princess, so she decided to find out who was sneaking into the pantry to steal food. That night, in the dim light, I saw the silhouette of a girl. I was about to pounce and tear her apart, ready to grab her by the hair for daring to steal from our princess who already ate so little. Choo-Choo screamed and was about to grab the thief, but when the person turned around, to the maid's surprise, the culprit was Princess Grace herself, who looked terrified of being caught snacking. She even dropped her bread roll on the floor. Now, talking to Sienna, Choo-Choo hoped it was all just some kind of misunderstanding. But the strong woman wasn't sure if she should reveal who she had caught red-handed the previous night. Grace had threatened her, saying that if she breathed a word, she and her entire family would regret it. The princess swore to haunt her family for generations, spreading fear and terror. Despite this, Choo-Choo told her best friend, hoping she could help resolve the situation. Sienna just said that in that case, there was no need to investigate further, because if she found the culprit, the princess would surely turn on her. And she'd probably order your head to be chopped off on the spot. Choo-Choo argued that she thought the princess was an angel and couldn't believe she would be so cruel. But Sienna was worried her friend might be accused of stealing the food, but Choo-Choo didn't seem to care. She'd rather people say it was the strong maid who stole than the beautiful princess. Besides, Miss Grace had been very nice to her since the incident. Sienna didn't see anything good about that and continued to worry about her friend. She praised Choo-Choo for her kindness, which made her blush a little. Then she wondered how the princess could eat so much food, as a lot was missing, and how she managed to stay so slim. Sienna thought for a moment, and then smiled, remembering that the nobles had a trick. Choo-Choo was surprised, as she had to train like crazy to maintain her figure. It turned out it wasn't as good a method as she had imagined. Afterwards, the girls said their goodbyes, and Sienna invited Choo-Choo to visit whenever she had time. Later, back at the warehouse, Sienna asked if they had caught the thief. They immediately told her that the princess's maids had already figured out who was after the food. Just as Sienna had feared, all fingers were pointing at Choo-Choo, since she was new to the palace. Without a word, the girls stormed out of the kitchen. She couldn't believe that her best friend, the kindest person she knew, was being accused of theft. Sienna headed to the princess's palace, but they told her there was no reason for her to enter since they had already caught the thief. She still started arguing that Choo-Choo was innocent, but another maid found it a coincidence that Sienna had trained with Choo-Choo, though she was willing to call it that. If Sienna had known how hostile everyone was towards her friend, she wouldn't have closed the investigation so quickly. Nevertheless, she demanded proof that Choo-Choo was indeed responsible for what happened. Of course, there was no proof. Everyone was just gossiping about her, and now she was locked in her room. This angered Sienna, as they had detained a maid based on mere suspicion. But the princess's maid just threatened to report it to the prosecutor general, in which case Sienna could also be accused of being an accomplice. The problem was the prosecutor didn't handle such matters, so it was most convenient to just blame a maid and be done with it. All the maids in the princess's palace disliked Choo-Choo, and it was in their interest to accuse her. Sienna wasn't about to abandon her friend, so she caught up with the maid and blocked her path. Then she, very angrily, demanded to see the princess. She was refused and told that Miss Grace did not speak with mid-level maids. Feeling she couldn't get in, Sienna turned to leave, but only because she had another way to handle this. Later, Princess Grace sat at her dining table, enjoying her usual pitifully small portion of food. She had also received a note from the maid named Sienna. A little while later, they met in the garden, and the maid greeted her politely. The princess got straight to the point and asked if Sienna knew who the real culprit was. She then demanded that she tell her everything she knew about the case. When When Sienna pointed the finger at the princess, she realized the maid was just trying to clear her friend's name. Besides, the maid had no actual proof, and the only person who knew the truth was under lock and key and wouldn't say a word without permission. Sienna had a theory. She had asked around about the rumors and found out that Miss Grace usually ate extremely little. A normal person would have fainted long ago eating so little. So she began to suspect the princess was getting her food from somewhere else. Grace started to argue, saying she was a princess and couldn't possibly be sneaking food, especially not that much. Otherwise, she would be as fat as a pig by now. But Sienna knew that nobles resorted to extreme measures to maintain their figures. One of those tricks was to eat a lot and then force yourself to throw it all up. That way, you wouldn't gain weight no matter how much you ate, but it took a huge toll on the body. Frequent vomiting makes swallowing painful and drains you mentally. Then you start vomiting involuntarily out of fear of gaining weight. Trust me, it all really messes you up. The princess wondered how a common servant would know all this. But Sienna had been through it herself and claimed she knew a way to escape this hell. Besides, Her Highness didn't need to reveal the culprit, but she had to release Choo Choo. If Miss Grace agreed, Sienna promised to help her. Choo Choo was soon released and ordered to go to the princess's study. But when she walked in, she was truly surprised. She hadn't expected to see Sienna there, not only present, but sitting right next to the princess. Miss Grace said she knew they were friends and that the maid had come with her services. First, the friends shared a hug, and Choo Choo even boasted that she had finally gotten a good rest. That was enough for her, as any more rest, and she'd start losing muscle. Grace recalled that her maids had reported they had confirmed the culprit. She was even surprised, since she already knew the truth. Nevertheless, she decided to frame Choo Choo, hoping to compensate her with money later. But now, she had a sharp lump stuck in her throat. Just then, Choo Choo started thanking the princess for releasing her. Miss Grace told her not to thank her, admitting she hadn't wanted to lock her up. She then guiltily blamed herself for secretly taking food from the warehouse. The maids were confused. The food belonged to the royal family anyway, so she wasn't stealing, just taking what was hers. The princess knew every word the maid said was true. She remembered Choo Choo telling her she could have just asked for the food instead of sneaking around at night like a common thief. Grace was torn about what to do next. To avoid getting caught, she had threatened the maid to keep her mouth shut, because if she didn't, she and her whole damn family would regret it. That night, Choo Choo had brought the princess a sausage roll, saying it tasted much better this way. Grace was caught off guard, but the maid didn't look at her with pity or a forced smile. She suddenly realized Choo Choo wasn't looking down on her, and after tasting the sausage roll, she agreed it was indeed fantastic. This maid respected the princess and kept her secret even when she was caught stealing. And guess what? Her Highness apologized to her directly, admitting she was a coward and shouldn't have treated her that way at all. Both maids were completely stunned, never expecting the princess to act this way. Later, Choo Choo was allowed to pour tea for the lady. She was as nervous as a bear afraid of spilling a single drop of honey. But the princess loved the tea she made, saying it tasted a bit like honey. Grace even took 2 sips before suddenly remembering it would make her fat. Sienna, still nearby, saw the princess panic and told her that 2 sips wouldn't make any difference. She then asked Her Highness to reveal when all this had started. The princess confessed that her mother was mostly concerned with her older brother, as he was closer to the throne. So Grace could basically live as she pleased. She was Queen Layla's 3rd daughter and had loved to eat a lot since she was a child. Born a princess, she had access to all sorts of amazing and delicious delicacies. This made her very happy, and she spent most of her time thinking about what to eat next. But soon, Her Highness gained weight and looked like a potato in her dresses. People whispered that no one would ever marry her looking like that. Later, when Grace was a bit older, her mother told her one day not to eat so much because she was about to be engaged, and her fiancé was Isaac von Hastings, the 3rd son of Count Hastings. The princess had actually met this young man before. He was a handsome and robust fellow who had even caught her stuffing her face. Her Highness the Princess fell in love with him at first sight, and he was a complete gentleman, even wiping the breadcrumbs from the corner of her mouth. When Grace found out she was to marry him, she was ecstatic. A princess like her, marrying such a great catch. But her mother told her to maintain her grace and not act like a fool. On the day the Count's son came to visit, Isaac looked even more handsome, having grown into a stunningly beautiful man. Their meeting started off very smoothly, and when he kissed the back of her hand, Grace was floating on air. He even confessed that he had strong feelings for her, which the princess believed without a doubt at the time. It seemed just like true love. Even the maids said that no one had ever given the princess a second glance. Yet this man had fallen for her instantly. Grace's features were indeed stunningly beautiful, so she didn't doubt the sincerity of his feelings. Before they knew it, their engagement date was set. In the hall, she noticed a group of girls who were all infatuated with Isaac. One of them was a great beauty, but she made a point of complimenting the princess as she walked in, and then the other young ladies chimed in, praising how beautiful Grace looked. Amidst the chorus of praise, Isaac himself appeared, declaring that he must greet Her Highness the Princess. He then knelt on one knee before everyone and kissed the back of her hand. He then asked after Her Highness's well-being, and she asked about his. Isaac went on to praise the chocolate cake she had sent, saying it melted in his mouth. The princess's cheeks flushed slightly as she admitted to being a little nervous. Just then, the beautiful girl, Julia, came over and said the two of them looked so close. All Grace could think about was that this handsome man was about to become her fiancé. She whispered to her friends that they had been engaged for a long time. On the outside, they were the perfect couple, although the princess was a bit plump. But Grace noticed that the young ladies had a very strange reaction to her confession. Shortly after, they were officially announced as engaged, and the guests offered their congratulations. Then, Lady Layla came forward, thanked everyone for their well wishes, and began her speech. Just then, Grace glanced at her fiancé and saw that he was smiling at her too, which made her very happy. Then she went back to have a little more to eat, but then she noticed Isaac was nowhere to be seen. The princess searched for him all over the palace, but couldn't find him for a long time. Walking into the garden, I saw his broad shoulders and finally felt I had found the person I was looking for. But as Grace drew closer, she saw a terrible sight. Isaac and Julia were standing in the garden. From the tone of their conversation, it was clearly more than just a friendly chat. The princess overheard Isaac saying that he had once promised Julia he would propose to her when she grew up. The count himself had explained that it was just a thoughtless remark made by a 10-year-old, but things were different now. He was 17 and Julia was 14. They were no longer children. Then Isaac told her to remain calm and pretend they didn't know each other. The count was acting very cautiously to avoid a real scandal. Meanwhile, Grace was praying that Isaac wouldn't call off their engagement for that slender beauty, who was apologizing for her tone, saying she was just shocked by the news of his engagement. Then she saw them start to say their goodbyes, with her fiancé explaining why he hadn't told her everything sooner. Before leaving, Julia asked Isaac if he really wanted to marry Miss Grace. The girl said humbly that she understood everything, but reminded him that the princess was a bit fat and that there were many rumors about her circulating among the other girls. At this, the bride-to-be was burning with rage, guessing what would happen next. It was said that Grace, in her tight pink dress and with her pale skin, looked more like a pork sausage. Grace wanted to rush out and rip apart the mouth of the bastard who said that about her. She suppressed her fury as Isaac suddenly said he already knew about all those rumors. Moreover, he had never liked fat girls, and Julia didn't understand why he was so eager to make this marriage happen. Grace wanted to scream. She now completely understood her fiancé's true feelings. He explained that the marriage was very advantageous for his family, and he had no choice but to endure it. Now, the princess knew that all the compliments about her beauty were complete lies. Devastated, she turned and walked away. Her dress brushed against some bushes, and Isaac and Julia realized someone was nearby. The princess returned to her quarters, heartbroken. She didn't even want to deal with that handsome man anymore. She just wanted to find a hole to crawl into and cry forever. When she reached the mirror, her face was already streaked with tears, and she collapsed in front of it. But from that day on, she started a diet. 3 months later, Isaac turned 17, and the third empress came to congratulate him, but Grace was nowhere to be seen. Some guests began to worry she wouldn't show up, but the count assured them that, according to Layla's promise, she would arrive soon. In fact, they hadn't seen each other since the engagement party, only communicating through letters. The princess had been using the excuse of being unwell, and now her friends were worried she would miss her fiancé's birthday. Someone joked that she couldn't handle her makeup and couldn't turn into Julia anyway, but the girls knew the truth. Isaac wasn't interested in that fat girl with the vacant eyes and loud personality. Just then, the young ladies noticed a strange expression on the young count's face. The third empress also turned her head to look, and the girls wondered who on earth they were looking at. Just then, they heard a familiar but unexpected voice. Princess Grace stood before them, looking like a completely different person. Her chubby cheeks were gone, she had a waistline, and now she was here to greet her fiancé. All the ladies were stunned, especially Isaac. Grace said that since it was his birthday, she wanted to go all out. Now his feelings were completely reversed, and the young count sincerely took her hand. He knelt and kissed her hand with genuine reverence. Grace finally saw the look on his face when he was truly stunned by her beauty. But to become like this, she had to reduce her food intake and take long walks. The princess hoped that now she could finally be truly happy. But honestly, when she threw everything up, she only felt a sense of relief. The more she ate, the more she threw up, and Grace realized this was the answer. Hearing her words, the maids realized the princess wasn't eating properly at all. She barely touched her food at the table, so she wouldn't vomit in front of everyone. And others didn't find it strange that she wasn't eating. They even thought she was being elegant. For a while, the princess was able to control herself, but a few months ago, things started to spiral out of control. At night, her thoughts would become chaotic, and she would stuff anything she could find in her mouth, then throw it all up in her room. It was the only way she could keep going, and over time, the amount of food kept increasing. Because Grace was in a constant state of starvation, but when she stuffed food into her mouth, she would lose her senses like an animal and then throw it all up every time to avoid gaining weight. Now, the princess was asking these maids for help. Overcome with emotion, Choo-Choo rushed forward to hug her highness. She understood that the lady had been through a lot and was going through a very difficult time. Sienna, in a rather calm voice, thanked the princess for telling them the truth. She promised to help her break this bad habit soon. First, to start eating normally, Grace needed to get rid of her negative feelings about food. Sienna told her about Tibetan monks, who don't eat animals or genetically modified grains, only plants that grow in their natural environment. The princess could eat things like carrots and cabbage and not gain any weight. But Grace pointed out that elephants also only eat vegetables, yet they are huge. Sienna had to explain that elephants are naturally that way. They are large, but they don't become flabby or overweight. Then, the girl recommended some vegetable dishes. Although she knew it would be difficult for the princess, who was deep in her bad habits, Grace swore she would do her best to try. So we had to find a way to prevent her from vomiting. Sienna said that exercising after meals might help. This wasn't the kind of ordinary chore Grace initially imagined. Exercise was just how knights trained. Honestly, any activity counts as exercise, even just a walk around the neighborhood. The problem was, the princess was afraid of getting a tan and ruining her fair skin. Sienna realized her highness wanted to maintain that delicate and elegant princess image. But just then, Choo-Choo suggested exercising indoors, showing off her own muscles as an example. This terrified Grace, as she had no desire to become bear-like. Sienna reassured her, explaining that Choo-Choo wouldn't push her too hard, just make sure she moved around more. She also asked if Grace had any problems with her teeth or if her throat hurt when she swallowed, because if she continued to force herself to vomit, she would only destroy her body, and things would only get worse. Her teeth would fall out one by one, her throat would become inflamed, she would be completely unable to eat, and that would be the end. Her Highness the Princess would kick the bucket. This statement scared Miss Grace badly. She definitely did not want to die. After she agreed to train with Choo-Choo, the girl dragged some dumbbells into the room and began showing her how to lift and lower the equipment to build muscle. Choo-Choo brought the princess the lightest dumbbells, but still doubted if she could lift them. But she was very surprised when her highness smoothly copied the movements she demonstrated. Despite this, Choo-Choo was still worried because she knew the princess had fragile bones, the kind that only a few people have. Then she added that regular exercise would help her gain some muscle. Grace dropped the dumbbells in a panic, nearly spraining her wrist, but she reminded me that she wanted to eat normally but was dead set against turning into a she-bear like that maid. Then Choo-Choo brought her a vegetable omelet, as Sienna had suggested, and her highness not only gobbled it down, but even licked the plate clean. She found it all super delicious and felt satisfied, but her face immediately contorted with fear, wanting to throw up before she started to get fat. Nevertheless, she remembered Sienna's advice and began to restrain herself. After a while, Sienna learned that the princess was doing well and had even increased her training sessions. Now she was happy for Grace, realizing she had worried for nothing. Sienna herself had to do some physical labor now. She had to move sacks. She had hoped that becoming a maid would make her stronger, but she realized her strength had its limits. While moving another sack, she nearly fell, and just then Rashid caught her. He appeared out of nowhere like a jack-in-the-box, but said he was just there to inspect the warehouse. Then he admitted he was teasing her. He had actually wanted to see Sienna. Ever since their last chance meeting, he said she had him wrapped around her finger, and after she kissed him, she ran away. He thought it was flirting, but she just couldn't keep up with his train of thought. When she blushed again, Rashid just found her incredibly cute. His Highness suddenly had the urge to pull her close and hold her tight. But seeing her on the verge of collapse, he felt it wasn't going to happen, at least not here. Noticing Sienna still had work to do, Rashid offered to help, and she accepted. Together, they finished quickly, and she thanked him for his help. Then she realized again how handsome he was, and that he hadn't been corrupted by power. Moreover, he turned out to be very considerate, which you couldn't tell from his appearance. She got so lost in thought that she unconsciously poked his muscle. Rashid asked, "What are you doing?" Realizing what she had done, Sienna was mortified and began to apologize profusely. But His Highness completely understood that she liked his physique, so he rolled up his sleeves and showed her his muscles. For a few seconds, Sienna just stared at his biceps, completely mesmerized, as if she were jealous. If she had half his muscle, her job would be so much easier. Just then, the prince imagined her all muscular, and though he thought she'd be cute that way too, he mostly liked her petite frame, which was easy to hold in his arms. This made Sienna blush and turn away, while Rashid continued to daydream. He wanted to get her closer, and he was sure it would happen. He just didn't know when. Soon, Sienna heard that Princess Grace was doing much better. When a maid went to visit Her Highness, she saw for herself that she looked even more beautiful. Her complexion had improved, her hair was shiny, and her eyes were full of life. But more importantly, the princess was much calmer and was vomiting less often. Grace admitted she had even grown to like exercising, especially since it didn't make her gain weight. And Choo-Choo was thrilled that Her Highness was doing so well with her workouts. Sheen was just happy that the princess was doing better and was full of energy, and she didn't even feel embarrassed when Choo-Choo compared her to a world-class athlete. To show off her results, she lifted a table to demonstrate her physical strength. Just then, they heard someone entering, and Choo-Choo barely managed to snatch the table from the princess's hands before they were seen. The maid who entered announced that Isaac had come to see Her Highness. Then he walked in himself, his expression serious and his movements full of confidence. Grace thanked Choo-Choo for her work and asked her to leave them alone for a moment. She wasted no time, promising only to prepare tea for Her Highness and her guest, Isaac. Isaac commented that the princess seemed to be on good terms with her maids, but he told her not to forget her status and to be careful not to be swayed by others. He also expressed his concern, mentioning that Her Highness didn't look quite right. After all, she was his fiancée, and he didn't expect her to greet him in such a disheveled state. A princess should always look flawless, though Grace didn't see anything wrong with her appearance. They were engaged, and she had told him he could come over any time. Isaac, realizing he had embarrassed Her Highness, explained that he came because he missed her. Moreover, he had heard from Empress Layla that Grace hadn't left her room in a long time. He was worried, but she couldn't tell him she was just trying to break her bad habit. Still, she was happy her fiancé was worried about her, and assured him she was fine. Isaac had also heard that the princess was eating more, so she didn't look so gaunt. But her loose, frilly dress told him she had been lying in bed all day. The guy was worried she would go back to her old self, and Grace shuddered at the thought. To cover it up, she claimed she was only eating vegetables and exercising. That was how she was controlling her weight, and she felt much better overall. Isaac was surprised to hear his fiancée was exercising, as that was something knights usually did. He even tried to talk her out of it, saying he really liked her the way she was now. He wanted her to be delicate and graceful and suggested she eat less to maintain her weight. Later, Choo-Choo brought the princess a salad for dinner, but it was made substantial enough to be truly satisfying. But Grace wouldn't even let her in, declaring she wasn't going to eat. She even yelled at the maid when she begged her to have at least one bite. Her Highness had decided to continue her old ways, as she thought it was the only way to be loved. She didn't even care that this habit of vomiting could kill her. In her mind, it was better than becoming disgusting in Isaac's eyes. Realizing she couldn't handle it alone, Choo-Choo called Sienna for help. Sienna asked to be let in, But now the princess wasn't even responding, and the maids began to panic, thinking she might have fainted. So Sienna just opened the door and went in to see what was going on. Grace was kneeling on the floor, her face as dark as a thundercloud, muttering that she wasn't eating. Even if she ate something out of hunger, she would throw it right back up. Even so, she was afraid something would remain in her stomach. Seeing her highness in this state, Choo-Choo was terrified for her and rushed to cover her with a blanket. She begged her to stop, but the princess just pushed the maid away more angrily. Her highness was afraid of becoming fat like she used to be. If that happened, Isaac would call off their engagement and marry that little brat Julia. If Grace got fat, even the maids would hate her again and start spreading rumors about her. The princess thought she was the most beautiful in the palace, but if she got fat, she would be nothing. Then she burst into tears, and the maids waited a few minutes, knowing the tears would bring some relief. Then Sienna suggested another idea and explained it. The only person her highness should care about is herself, and she shouldn't waste a second thinking about people who don't love her at all. Her highness seemed interested in this advice, but then the sadness returned, and the tears flowed even harder. To comfort the poor soul, the maids hugged her, as hugs usually help ease the pain. Later, when Grace had calmed down a bit, Sienna told her not to worry, that no one would ever know about what happened today. In that moment, Sienna looked like a high-ranking maid who had served the royal family for years. The princess even felt that Sienna must have had a similar problem because she understood her so well. Then she asked me to tell my story, and Grace was curious how Sienna got out of her predicament. She said in a slightly sad voice that she had a similar story, that she had desperately craved love, but when she stopped fighting her eating disorder, everyone started to hate and abandon her. Even her parents doubted she could get married looking like that. Then she realized it was a poison that was eating her from the inside, and the little doll-like self she once was had disappeared. Sienna explained that it's not worth torturing yourself to please others. The princess could live however she wanted, especially with the power she possessed. Because Grace was the daughter of this country's empress and emperor, she could eat whatever she wanted, wear whatever dress she wanted, and if anyone didn't like it, they could get lost. If Grace found someone she cared about, she should try to get close to him. It doesn't have to be Isaac, right? There's no law that says you have to marry him. Sienna made it sound so easy to say such crazy things, but it really helped her highness calm down. Then Sienna prepared to leave. Just then, the quick-thinking Choo-Choo shoved a dish she had made onto the princess's nose. She apologized, bad timing, then pretended to leave, leaving her highness alone with the food. Choo-Choo just added that if the lady wasn't hungry, she'd be happy to eat it all herself, or she could teach her another simple exercise for quick weight loss. It was then that Grace realized that rather than being obsessed with losing weight, she wanted to become stronger. The next morning, the maids were running around the palace like headless chickens. They had made a huge amount of food for Princess Grace, and they were shocked at how much she could eat. When she had finally satisfied her appetite, she propped her feet up on the table. She crossed her legs and stretched, ecstatic that she could finally eat peacefully as she pleased. All that was left was to pick the scraps from between her teeth with a toothpick, which only made people find her even more eccentric. After a 5-minute rest, Grace ordered the head maid to bring her dessert. The maid dared to suggest that the lady would get fat again, but the princess twisted her words, making it seem like she was in the wrong. The maid swore she only wanted her highness to be happy and obediently went to fetch the dessert. Choo-Choo decided to add fuel to the fire, suggesting that even dogs aren't disturbed when they eat, yet this person dared to talk back to the princess. After Grace had her fill of sweets, it was time to start exercising. She could lift very heavy weights, and her muscles became very developed, so much so that she herself loved it. Just then, Isaac rushed in, screaming hysterically that the princess would ruin her figure. Grace, however, boasted that thanks to the training equipment Choo-Choo made for her, she was getting stronger and stronger. She was proud of it and liked it this way, plus she hated makeup anyway. A horrified Isaac began to beg her to reconsider. He even knelt on one knee, explaining that this was wrong. But this time, the princess was simply enraged, and she began to berate him for daring to scold the most respected person in the country, the daughter of the imperial ruler. This kind of behavior would normally be punished, and Isaac realized he had gone too far. But he just knelt there, watching as Grace's sweet face filled with rage. She disgustedly shook off his hand for daring to make fun of her. Now the guy realized he had messed up and started to apologize. He was probably afraid his bride wouldn't become the most beautiful flower in the empire. But no matter how he tried to smooth talk his way out of it, Her Highness the Princess didn't believe a word. She gave him a hard slap, which even startled Choo Choo. The princess then taunted that the young count's arms were so slender, and now she knew why. He might be a nobleman who enjoys a life of comfort, but with those flimsy arms, he could hardly be called a strong man. Miss Grace finished by telling him to go work out in the gym. Finally, some peace and quiet. Later, His Highness Rashid showed up at Sienna's workplace again. She asked what it was this time, and it turned out he just wanted something to drink. Before this, he had dropped by because he wanted some fruit, then he came to look at the menu, and another time he came to get some pet food. Sienna was worried that Rashid would cause trouble for her, and possibly even a scandal. If that happened, her relatively peaceful life as a maid would be over. As if reading her mind, Rashid swore that as a prince of this empire, he could smooth over any trouble. And honestly, with him frequently visiting Sienna's storeroom, the other maids didn't dare to say a word. After calming down a bit, the girl asked the prince what he wanted to drink. Rashid just sneezed in response, and Sienna realized his throat might just be dry. But then she noticed he was a little flushed, and after touching his forehead, she discovered His Highness had a cold. She started to scold him, telling him not to mess around and to get back to bed and rest properly. Rashid couldn't rest. He had lived on the battlefield since he was 13, had been wounded, and had even broken bones. Another time, he was hit by a poisoned arrow, which damaged his internal organs and nearly killed him. Compared to those experiences, he felt a cold was nothing to be afraid of, saying it was like a leaf brushing against his body. But Sienna disagreed, saying that leaf could be poisonous and put him in danger. Even if everything seemed fine, she urged him to be careful to avoid complications. Afterwards, Sienna suggested taking him back to his palace to begin treatment later. The girl helped His Highness into bed and then prepared to leave. But just then, Rashid grabbed her apron, saying his throat was getting tighter and his temperature was rising. The girl didn't understand why he didn't ask other servants for help, but she couldn't just leave him like this. So she made him a cup of milk with honey and ginger. Just one cup should make His Highness feel much better. Rashid took a sip and then praised the maid, saying that anything she made was delicious. Sienna was a little confused, not understanding how someone who had spent so much time on the battlefield could say something like that. Then she told him bluntly that she thought he was a strange person. His Highness, however, twisted her words, saying she liked strange men, which made her completely flustered and start to babble, trying to find something to say. Rashid took this as a victory, as if according to her own words, he was her type. Sienna thought this was pure nonsense, like he was delirious from the fever. She wanted to tuck him in, and just then, he said he really liked her taking care of him. Not wanting to stay by his side for too long, she asked him to entrust this task to someone else. Back at her post, Sienna thanked the maids for their hard work. Today was her last day at this job. The maids were also fond of her, and as a token of their gratitude, they gave her a small gift. They had made her a necklace out of acorns and nuts, so she could have a snack anytime while working. Then Sienna saw Jean, who was as quiet as a mouse. She suddenly called her over to say goodbye as well, though it was only temporary, as they would see each other again soon. The three maids bowed their heads respectfully and obediently, seeing Sienna off. Once she crossed the threshold, she could proudly say that she was now an intermediate maid. Of course, Sienna went straight back to the Ruby Palace. She missed Aerys very much and noticed she was looking well. It seemed the Empress had been taking good care of her all this time. She was curious how the little one had managed the Empress and asked her to spill all the details. The little princess tilted her head a bit shyly and said that her grandmother must really like her, because even when she clattered her silverware and smacked her lips while eating, the Empress never scolded her, just watched her and gave her a few compliments from time to time. Even when Aerys threw a tantrum, the Empress never lost her cool. The little one thought her grandmother just missed her own granddaughter very much, which was why she was being extra nice to her. Gulria even gave her some old dresses, which the little one thought were completely tasteless. The twin maids were thrilled by everything the little princess had gone through. When they heard she had missed them very much, they even started to sob. Then, the twins began to argue in whispers about who would get to take care of Her Highness first. This made the princess think they were even stranger, even though they had been promoted. A little while later, a royal carriage stopped in front of the Ruby Palace. When little Aerys saw who got out, she started to complain, not wanting to see those guests. The visitor was Princess Grace, who wasn't there for Aerys, but for Sienna, and she was sporting a brand new hairstyle. She wanted to show it off to the maid and chat about old times. The problem was, Aerys hated it when other people mingled with her maid, so she demanded that Grace leave. Even though Aerys's face was twisted with anger, Grace still found her adorable. Just then, Sienna appeared, and seeing her highness, asked what brought her here. But then she saw Choo-Choo sobbing behind the princess and couldn't help but worry. It turned out the strong woman just missed Sienna very much, and she even apologized to Aerys for the sudden visit. The little princess couldn't believe the maid had followed her highness all this way, just for that. So, Choo-Choo decided to take her leave so as not to disturb the sisters' conversation. Sienna agreed that it was indeed improper to barge in like this, especially ruining her master's mood with tears. She was just acting, pretending to sternly scold her friend. The trick worked, and Grace chimed in that she was very happy to see her sister, which was why she came to visit. The princesses then agreed to have tea together, after which both hoped they could slip away as soon as possible. The emperor's daughters sat down in a pavilion where the sun wasn't so scorching, although Grace was no longer so afraid of getting a tan. Meanwhile, Choo-Choo was asking Sienna why the princesses had suddenly become so friendly. Sipping their tea, Grace knew she had to speak first and asked Aerys if she already had a fiancé. She explained that she wasn't trying to give any advice and admitted she was a little jealous of the little one. But she asked her to postpone her engagement for as long as possible, or better yet, not get engaged at all, because as she got older, the way she saw her partner would be completely different from how she saw them at first. The girl realized something must have happened between Grace and her fiancé. Grace admitted that she felt uneasy around him. A princess is supposed to be composed, maintain her decorum, and speak in a gentle voice, right? No matter what, she had to remain elegant and calm and absolutely not swear. Then, as if on cue, both princesses declare that if a man makes a demand, you'd better comply. Choo-Choo was a little surprised to see the sisters getting along so well. Just as the imperial princesses were chatting, another guest appeared. Empress Angela arrived with her son, but seeing that Aerys was busy, she decided to come back later. However, a sharp-eyed person noticed that the boy was looking at her with a strange expression. They explained that he wanted to draw her, and the princess agreed. Aerys was also eager to watch her little brother paint. The boy's mother noticed that things were starting to repeat themselves, as something similar had happened last time. Meanwhile, Prince Rashid received a letter from his family, saying they would be staying at the spa resort for a while longer. This meant His Highness would have to organize the upcoming Rose Banquet all by himself. It was an annual event, and the biggest rule was that everyone had to attend with a partner. This rule, of course, also applied to the host. It was then that Saul realized in a panic that His Highness didn't have a fiancée yet, but he suggested that Rashid use this opportunity to find a lady who could eventually become his wife. This girl would also need to understand the prince's personality, but he was completely uninterested in this. For some reason, he just wasn't interested in girls, which sparked all sorts of nasty rumors about him. The truth was, Rashid was only interested in animals. He had even thought about taking an animal as his partner to the banquet, and thought it would be quite cute. The guard was at his wit's end, afraid His Highness would die alone. But he suddenly remembered that there was one lady in the kingdom who had indeed caught the prince's attention. So he boldly suggested having Miss Sienna as his partner for the Rose Banquet. Rashid was all for it, but he seriously doubted she would agree. The guard decided to handle the matter himself, and headed to Sienna's quarters with a gift. But just as His Highness had expected, the maid flatly refused him. She explained that the problem wasn't the gift, but her status. Even for just one day, a common maid merely standing by His Highness's side would be fiercely criticized. Vicious rumors would spread, and Sienna's peaceful life would be over. She was right. Saul even began to blame himself for not considering this. He just wanted her to be by the prince's side, not those hypocritical ladies. Of course, there were plenty of women throwing themselves at Rashid, but he wasn't interested. His Highness only wanted to see the maid, Sienna. But now he would have to attend the banquet alone because she had refused him. Sienna knew Rashid was fond of her like a small pet, but that wasn't a reason to say yes. She told Saul she was sorry, at which point he suddenly announced that he would have to be the prince's partner. Of course, there would be a ton of vicious rumors afterwards, but Saul was used to it. His mother would cry her eyes out, but the guard had no other choice. Sienna knew full well what the consequences would be, and so agreed to accompany His Highness. But she had one main condition. Saul cut her off, promising she could have anything, even 10 times what she asked for. But she only wanted to preserve her peaceful life as a maid, so she asked him not to reveal her identity. This could be a bit tricky, as many people in the palace already recognized her face. Sienna told the guard not to worry. She would take care of her appearance herself. For Saul, the main thing was to create a fake identity for her. A little while later, Sienna headed to the imperial palace. The moment Rashid saw her, he danced with joy like a little child. He was thrilled that she had accepted the invitation, but she didn't understand why he hadn't asked her himself. It was as if his noble princely pride was too fragile to ask a maid for help. Rashid explained that his request might have sounded like an order, so he was worried. He finally realized that sending someone else was a complete cop-out. Then Rashid knelt on one knee and kissed Sienna's hand, which left her completely stunned. The prince pressed his cheek against her hand, thanking her for agreeing to his difficult request. Sienna was captivated by his face in that moment and asked him to tell her more about the banquet. It was an event to celebrate the goddess of roses and love, so a partner was mandatory. Moreover, the host had to perform the opening dance. There were no exceptions. His Highness noticed Sienna was listening a little too seriously and guessed that she didn't believe in love. The girl thought love was very rare, like a miracle, especially in a royal family. So, yes, this kind of event was a bit shocking to her. She had thought they just needed to make an appearance at the beginning, but the prince told her not to worry or feel pressured. But then Sienna announced that since she had agreed to come, she would give it her all. She even demanded that Rashid practice dancing with her right away. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a carriage carrying other banquet guests was traveling down a forest path. The red-haired man, named Kieran, was holding a locket containing a picture of Sienna. His sister, Carolina, told him to throw that thing away and forget about the girl. Everyone believed that Princess Sienna had died on the day the Aslan kingdom fell. But Kieran didn't believe it. They never found her body, so she must still be alive, just somewhere else. The red-haired woman knew the boy was obsessed with the princess. But their purpose here was to strengthen their ties with the royal family, and she would not stand by if Kieran's love life started to get in the way. The boy told his mother not to worry, swearing he hadn't lost his mind enough to do anything foolish. After calming down, the woman promised to help him once she was done with her own business. Kieran himself had never stopped believing that he would find Sienna no matter what, and when he found her, he would never let go of her hand again. Meanwhile, Rashid noticed the maid danced incredibly well, completely in sync with the beat. The girl mentioned she was once a princess, but never thought this skill would come in handy. As for the prince, it seemed like he was dancing for the first time. His Highness had indeed never learned to dance, or rather, he never had time for that sort of thing. It was a time of war, and Rashid didn't have a chance. Sienna couldn't even believe that this most powerful heir to the imperial throne had chosen an unusually difficult path to become a prince. She didn't understand why His Highness went through all that, but hey, it wasn't the only strange thing. Then, after suddenly apologizing for her forwardness, Sienna bluntly asked Rashid why he didn't have a fiancée yet. Just as the rumors said, the prince declared he wasn't interested in girls, but saw something special in Sienna. This shocked the maid a little, as Rashid gently touched her face, fixing a strand of her hair. Sienna's face reminded him of white bread with 3 round beans, which made her look super cute. Now she even regretted asking such a question and just asked to continue practicing the dance, pointing out that Rashid was a fast learner. Later, Sienna told Aerys she would be her brother's partner at the banquet and hoped she would be okay with it. But the princess was clearly jealous that the maid seemed to have taken a liking to another member of the royal family. She declared that she would not stand idly by. To that end, the princess planned to make Sienna smell of her scent, so it could be detected from a mile away. So at Her Highness's command, the twins grabbed the maid's arms and dragged her to the bathroom to rub her down with the same essential oils as Princess Aerys. The little princess also didn't want her maid to look shabby at the banquet. She wanted Sienna to be the most beautiful one there. Actually, Sienna had intended to get ready herself. They had even given her money, and now she had to repay His Highness's generosity and really make an effort. Sienna didn't resist the preparations, but she did ask them to prepare lavender essential oil for her next bath. She also requested a different hair conditioner so her hair wouldn't get tangled so easily. Sienna seemed a bit suspicious to the princess, and that was exactly why she liked her. So Aerys gave the maid everything she asked for. The next time Sienna saw the prince, he couldn't stop staring at her. She even wondered if there was something on her face, but Rashid just noted that she seemed a little different. His dancing skills were also definitely improving, which surprised even himself. But he knew it was thanks to Sienna that he had learned to dance, and he was grateful for it. She caught that strange look on his face again, and he was getting too close. She confessed that she couldn't come to rehearsal tomorrow because she had to pick out a dress and jewelry for the banquet. And since she wanted to keep her identity a secret, she had to be perfectly prepared. Also, Rashid couldn't go with her to pick out a dress, because then it would be obvious she was his partner. It would be impossible to hide Rashid's face like last time, as this was no commoner's festival. We would likely run into a whole crowd of noble ladies out shopping for the banquet. In any case, it would be impossible to completely hide his identity, and Sienna didn't want to pick out a dress with him. After explaining all this, the maid was about to leave, but the prince stopped her. As she turned around, he popped a candy into her mouth. It was a chocolate candy with a raspberry filling, and she thought it was delicious. Still, she asked him to be more polite next time and give her the wrapped candy. Rashid just gave her a sweet smile, but promised to grant her request. Watching her walk away, the prince noticed how small she was, but her steps were light and cute. The maid standing like that reminded Rashid of a chipmunk. The bloodthirsty prince was indeed very good at turning on the charm when talking to people, but it was all an act. Rashid was cold and ruthless, without a shred of humanity in him. The prince could chop off anyone's head without a second thought. But around this short and cute maid, His Highness looked like a normal person. Saul, the guard, couldn't believe this 17-year-old could smile so brightly. Rashid himself was surprised at how much he liked Sienna. He wanted to feed her delicious things every day, to hold her and pet her when she yawned. His Highness wanted to take her for a walk when he was bored. Hearing all this, Saul realized the prince saw Sienna as a squirrel and knew he was officially starting to lose his mind. Just then, it occurred to him, if Sienna wanted to leave the palace, would His Highness let her go? I mean, she was once a princess, and life as a maid would sooner or later become tiresome for her. So Saul needed to know, if she asked to leave, would the prince let her go without hesitation? Rashid glanced at his pets and declared that he would care for them and protect them, but never force them to stay. They were free to leave him at any time. So if Sienna wanted to leave, His Highness would not keep her. Knowing Rashid might be sad later, Saul interjected that Sienna no longer had any ties to her old home, and she was happy being a maid and was already moving up the ranks. So unless something drastic happened, the girl would most likely stay. Unless someone appeared out of nowhere and made her want to be a princess again. Rumor has it that a heavyweight representative from mysterious high society has arrived for His Highness. Meanwhile, Sienna's mind was racing, thinking about accessories that could hide her identity and help her blend in. The twins and Aerys were practically begging Sienna to let them come along. But she went to the fitting alone, to a shop that didn't even have a sign. This meant it was a secret shop that was extremely discreet about its clientele. Walking into the shop, Sienna was a bit blown away. The place looked like the Empress's walk-in closet. The shop assistant noticed the customer didn't look entirely like a noble, but not entirely like a commoner either. Sienna felt a little awkward, but there was no turning back now. Besides, there were some very exquisite designs here, which might even carry some hidden meanings. Then Sienna asked them to put together a dress, accessories, the whole ensemble. She intended to spend about 10,000 gold coins. Seeing the shop assistant's surprise, Sienna assured her the money wasn't stolen or fake. She even offered to pay the full amount up front, but the shop assistant told her not to worry. Then Sienna asked them to prepare a silk dress, the kind that exudes elegance and luxury. She wanted a necklace made of white pearls and century-old diamonds. They brought in the chief designer to handle the job, and he agreed that the necklace perfectly complemented her skin tone. He also noticed that she was clearly an expert in this area. Both the designer and the staff felt the girl must come from a noble family, so they dared not mess things up. The saleswoman suddenly remembered the mistake she had made at the beginning and worried it would eventually get her into trouble. Sienna had bought herself a complete new outfit and still had money to spare, so she asked to see the gift accessories. The girl decided to treat her friends and wanted to look through everything in the shop. The guard, Sol, received the first gift and was so moved he even shed tears, feeling he was unworthy. But Sienna told him not to feel burdened, saying it was bought with the money she had left over. Sienna picked out gifts for everyone she cared about and for her wonderful colleagues. Princess Aerys was a little surprised, but grateful for the gesture. Choo-Choo was thoroughly touched and didn't know how to thank her friend for the small trinket. Sienna also bought something for Lacy, the little painter. After taking care of these things, she could go back to practicing dancing with His Highness. Then, Rashid, with his innocent smile, asked Sienna if she had a gift for him as well. As it turned out, she hadn't bought him anything, and he started to complain that she didn't love him anymore. But that wasn't the real reason. She had intentionally not bought anything, because she felt Rashid would prefer something else. From her expression, it was clear she wasn't going to reveal what it was just yet. But His Highness wasn't discouraged at all. On the contrary, he felt a little excited. Today was their last dance rehearsal, and Sienna told Rashid not to forget everything he had learned. But he didn't want her to leave yet, and begged her to stay with him a little longer. Sienna refused, as the banquet was only 3 days away, and she didn't want to get in the way of the preparations. Besides, she needed to get ready herself. Rashid hoped she wouldn't turn into someone else. The girl wanted to explain something to him, but only said she would see him at the banquet. Afterwards, the red-haired man was scolded by Kieran for misspeaking in front of His Highness. But the guy swore he had tried his best to observe etiquette. Carolina suddenly remembered how things had actually happened. Just as the arrival of the representatives from the magic merchant group was announced, they went in for an audience with the prince. These people created rare magic stones and ran some very specialized businesses. For this reason, they were respected by the emperor himself, who was Rashid's father. When they walked in, they were excited, realizing the rumors about his appearance were true. But for some reason, the woman felt that His Highness was hiding something behind that handsome face. She then introduced herself as Carolina, daughter of the mystic merchant, and greeted the prince. But His Highness didn't even respond to her greeting, and you could feel a chilling aura emanating from him. This made the girl even more certain that all handsome men are jerks. Then she suddenly nudged Kieran, telling him to introduce himself as well. But the guy had other things on his mind. He couldn't forget that this bloodthirsty prince had destroyed the kingdom of Aslan, the homeland of Princess Sienna. Because of him, she had gone missing. So Kieran was not exactly eager to offer his greetings. Carolina noticed and apologized, explaining that her brother's beloved girl was missing, which was why he was a bit absent-minded. Rashid just glanced at them as if they were clowns, wondering what gift they had brought. He was hoping it might be a bow tie for Chuck Chuck, or perhaps some candy for Naim Naim. Just then, Sol reminded Rashid that, given his status, he should be interacting with his guests. The prince then guessed that the missing girl must be very beautiful for the red-haired man to be so completely out of it. He explained that she had a round face and bright eyes, basically a dessert made from the finest flour. He had lost this girl because of some bastard who was eager for bloodshed, but he would definitely find her. He swore to himself that he would never let this woman leave his arms again. Rashid said sarcastically that he would pray for the guy's wish to come true. As soon as they were outside, Carolina told her brother to get lost, or perhaps find a girl. Kieran had no intention of doing anything else. He was convinced he would find Sienna. He prayed that she would just hold on a little longer and that they would meet again. The next morning, as soon as Sienna woke up, the twins brought her breakfast. But she refused, and they worried she had lost her appetite. Aerys showed up just then, promising to stay with the handmaiden until the end, and asking why she wasn't eating. In truth, Sienna didn't want to be constrained by a corset, and she also wanted to avoid having to use the restroom. The twins began to get her ready, planning to start with her makeup. While they were getting her ready, Aerys fell asleep at the table. They only woke her up when everything was ready. The princess couldn't contain her excitement when she saw how stunningly beautiful her handmaiden had become. But Grace's beauty was different that day. She looked like a sleek Black Panther. Isaac followed behind her, confused as to why she wasn't wearing the dress he had given her. But the princess couldn't wear it because it was too small. She then got angry at her fiancé, saying he didn't understand sizes at all and couldn't see that she no longer fit into small dresses. Grace used to be like a doll, but now she was a completely different person. She even told Isaac that if he liked the dress so much, he should wear it himself. Now it was awkward for both of them to be together, and the princess suggested they move about separately. The count begged for her forgiveness, saying he just wished Grace would go back to how she used to be. Carolina spotted the princess and realized the rumors were true. Then she saw a girl who looked like Princess Sienna, but it turned out to just be the same hair color. It was a joke from Carolina, but Kieran was very upset. The girl told her brother not to get his hopes up and to pull himself together. Because His Highness was about to appear, and they were potential big clients, so we couldn't afford to mess up. If Kieran messed up, his sister threatened to lock him up, and he could say goodbye to Sienna forever. The guy figured it was best to behave for now, so that his sister would help him search for her later. Then they heard people whispering that His Highness had arrived alone. Rashid addressed the guests from the stairs, telling them not to worry, as his dance partner would be arriving shortly. The whispers started up again as everyone wondered who the prince's partner could be. His Highness was going crazy with anticipation, waiting to see who it would be. They hadn't seen each other in 3 days, but Sienna had promised she would appear at the banquet in a manner befitting her status. She even promised to play the part of an arrogant and conceited princess at the banquet. To ensure no one would recognize her, Sienna planned to dress completely differently. But Rashid couldn't figure out how she would hide her kind eyes and her sweet, round face. Soon, His Highness spotted a girl in a stunning gown with long, curly hair cascading down her back. It wasn't until she announced that it was her honor to dance with the prince tonight that Rashid realized it was Sienna. The girl approached the guests, stood before His Highness, and introduced herself as Rosanna. Then, a pleasant melody began to play, preparing the guests in attendance to dance. Rashid took Sienna's hand, still unable to believe she had managed to pull this off. Her dress completely concealed her true identity, and her face was hidden beneath heavy makeup. The girl realized the makeup was so good because she had gotten used to it back when she was a puppet. But this was the first time she had worn such makeup since then, and that wasn't even what was bothering her now. Sienna noticed that the prince's dancing was much better than it had been on their last day of rehearsal. Rashid explained that he had been practicing just as she had asked, but she never thought he would actually do it. When she found out it was Sul who had helped him practice, she couldn't help but laugh and even try to picture the scene. But since the prince had actually listened to her, Sienna promised to show him something special. The dance usually ended with a mutual bow, but she decided to make an exception tonight. Just for His Highness, Sienna gave him a hug, which made his entire day. He seized the opportunity, dipped her low, and then kissed her, just to make the moment unforgettable. Later, Count Harrington approached the prince, reminding him that he had paid him a visit before leaving for the battlefield. As a gift to welcome him back, the Count had sent him a little something. Rashid didn't remember receiving anything, but Sienna noticed there was Harrington wine. It seemed the guests were in for a treat. Sienna knew His Highness wasn't keen on socializing with the other nobles, so she decided to mingle on her own, hiding her face with her fan. She slowly approached Lady Reinhardt and began to talk about her long journey. People began to whisper that Rosanna seemed arrogant and conceited, yet she followed etiquette perfectly. They also couldn't figure out how she knew so much about the guests when answering their questions. The girl revealed no personal information, except for her name. There were also some guests who noted that Rosanna and His Highness looked good together. Some wanted to see the couple again in a calmer setting. Moreover, the guests were very surprised that His Highness was so actively praising his companion. The girl was hoping the banquet would end without a hitch when she suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was Kieran's voice, the child who used to visit her kingdom often because of the new queen who loved magic. Back then, the boy always stood up for the princess. And now, it seemed he thought he recognized the beauty in the red dress. Sienna wanted to confess, but she couldn't reveal her identity now and claimed they didn't know each other. She was sure Kieran couldn't recognize her, as her face now was different from her real one. Just then, Carolina interjected that her brother was going crazy because his friend was missing. After that, the guy stormed off, very upset. Sienna realized they were talking about her, as Kieran had always taken good care of her. Now, having to pretend like this in front of him was tearing her up inside. After a while, Carolina and her brother headed for the exit, but Kieran kept looking back at Sienna, feeling that she wasn't telling the truth. He then reminded his sister that she had promised to help him find Sienna after the banquet. He added that he had behaved very well as she had asked, smiling politely at all the arrogant nobles. Carolina agreed, saying her brother had been much more obedient than usual. It had certainly been effective. As soon as she agreed to help, Kieran started asking about the girl who had come with His Highness. He desperately wanted to know more about this woman. He could tell she had a different face and a completely different aura, but something about her was unsettling him. Kieran was completely captivated by the way the beauty had looked at him. Recalling that look now, Kieran was reminded of the princess's face. It was a face he had seen as a child and could never forget.